Hey there, and welcome to another episode of The Bible. Wait, what? Yes, this is the podcast that unravels the mysteries of the Bible's most perplexing, puzzling, and thought-provoking passages. My name is Rohan, and each session I'm joined by a member of our team at C3 Church, Camden, Picton and Thirroul, as they quiz me on some of the more complicated, confusing, challenging, and even confronting passages that we read in our weekly Bible reading plan. We understand that reading the Bible can be a challenging and perplexing experience. Many people just don't know where to start, they get confused, and so they give up. Well, that's why this podcast exists, to equip you with the tools and the knowledge to explore the richness and depth of the Bible for yourself. So grab your Bible, take a deep breath, and join us as we explore this week's passages. To learn more about us or to get in touch with us at C3 Church Camden, Picton and Thirroul, visit any of our 3 locations' websites. That's c3camden.church, c3picton.church and c3thirroul.church. Or you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube just by searching for any of our locations' names. So without any further delay, let's dive into today's conversation. Well, hey everyone, welcome back to The Bible. Wait, what? I am sitting down today with first-time podcast guest Becky Babbington from C3 Thirroul. Hey Becky, good to have you with us.
It's good to be here.
Yes.
It's very exciting.
And you have provided a day where I've actually had to do quite a lot of homework.
Oh, me too.
You too, yes.
Why? Exactly.
Yes, why did Jeannie dob you in for this one, I wonder?
Well, I picked it. I
You picked it,
can't
did you?
even blame anyone else. I probably should have read the fine print a little
Right.
bit more. I saw Redeemer and
She
and
saw
thought, yeah.
Redeemer, there's our
And
topic.
didn't see
on the
Revelation.
father. Yeah, that's right. She saw Redeemer and she saw Ruth and she went, that sounds good.
Yes.
She didn't notice that we also have Revelation chapters 5, 6, 7, 8.
Usually the New
9.
Testament, it's a safe bet. It's the
Yeah.
Old Testament you need to look at to see what am I tackling. But
Well,
yeah,
strap
my own
yourself in,
fault.
folks, because a little later on we're going to tackle Revelation and we're going to have some fun. And we're not going to solve the Revelation dilemmas in
Shame.
this podcast, but we'll just see how we go. Depending on what sort of questions you've got, we'll be able to go somewhere. Excuse me if my voice is a little bit croaky today. It just gives me a voice for radio when I'm a little bit sticky up the back of the throat, but all good. I'll keep my distance from Becky. But the whole family...
It's brought a level of seriousness to the voice.
It
It's
has.
sort of-
It does sound like I kind of sound like Shannon, don't I? That deep radio voice that Shannon Moyer has. Becky's got her kids in the house, Liza and Finn. Are you going to come and say hello to everybody?
Come say hi.
They've just been across the road. They've got food.
the goods.
They've got goods. Hey, Eliza.
Hello, everyone.
That's Eliza. Come on, Finn. Come and say hello over here. Finn has a question for our podcast world. Come on, Finn. Jump on here and tell us what your question is.
How does God and Jesus do all these miracles?
How does God and Jesus do his miracles? What a good question. Hey, why don't you turn around, look
Very
at the
good,
camera
Finn.
for all our YouTube people and wave to that red light up there for our YouTubers. I want you to think about that. How does God do all these miracles? Well, I would think that God's pretty big, wouldn't you? Do you know the Colin Buchanan song, My God is So Big, So Strong? You love
Yeah.
nothing like a bit of Bucko, hey?
Yeah.
He's pretty cool. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do.
Clap, clap.
That's what you need. You need the... Well, if God is big enough to make everything, make the whole wide world, do you reckon he can do whatever he wants to do? I reckon it's very possible. Come over here, talking to the microphone so our guests can hear you.
But I think he would use his powers to do it for good.
I think you're spot on, Finn.
Yeah.
I
Very
think
spot
you're
on.
right. God is a good father. And he, unlike some superheroes who try to use their powers for bad, God uses his powers for good. For good in the world, for our good, because he loves us, yeah? And he does miracles to heal people and deliver people, set them free so they can have a full and blessed life. I reckon that's a pretty good question you've asked there. Yeah, pretty good. Are you going to go and eat your food now?
Yeah.
Go and
Go
enjoy.
for it, guys.
Thanks, guys. Love God.
Good on you, Eliza.
And also, I love him. Please do.
That's awesome. Good on you guys. Enjoy that holiday lunch. First day of school holidays for you guys. Well, we are doing this topic, the Redeemer.
Yes.
The topic of the Redeemer. So we're going to maybe do a bit of intro there and then go from there, hey?
I thought, I have my own understanding of that word redeem or redeemer, but I thought it might be helpful just as a general note to unpack that word.
Unpack it a little bit.
Yes.
Well, I have my general understanding too, but now that you've got me, I'm a bit nervous. So I might just have to look it up. But my understanding of the word redemption or redeem is in its purest form is to buy back, to purchase back. So if we sell something to to a pawn shop, we go down there and to buy it back is to if you have got the money now, you can buy back that ring or that phone or whatever it was you sold. So that's in its simplest form. And that theme of redemption comes through as one of the key things of the Father, that he has purchased back us from the enemy, from the curse of sin and death through the death of his son Jesus.
Oh, awesome!
So I think that's it. I mean, we can try and look it up. Let's just bear with us for a minute. Let's have a look.
Let's get some ancient.
What have you
if
found?
You could do some ancient Greek or
no, I can look in Strong's Concordance.
No, look, I'm not putting you to the test here, but I think it's that picture of
kinsman redeemer.
I think the word that I guess think in close proximity is restore. That idea of I guess restoration for something that, for you're saying something that's been taken away, or whether that's been diminished in some way.
Diminished? How so?
Oh, just the idea of I think one of my favourite Psalms 103 is that idea of our life being redeemed.
Redeemed, yes.
And I haven't thought of it as being bought back, but I guess I think of it more of restored. So when we do go through difficult seasons of life, the idea of God's redeeming work, of bringing that back and I think taking us to a new level.
Like Psalm 103 says,
Yes.
the Lord has, renews our
Life.
youth like the
Yes.
eagles, and it says he heals all our diseases and crowns us with
Yes.
loving kindness. So it's almost like not just giving us back what we lost, but lumping on more,
Yes.
a good measure
Yes.
more. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's a good point there. Well, the Hebrew word, I should have known this, it's goel. That is pronounced goel, or that's probably, the English transliteration of it. In the Old Testament of the Bible, this term is often used to refer to a close relative who has the right and responsibility to redeem or buy back property, or a person who has fallen into slavery or debt. The Redeemer's role is to restore and protect the rights and well-being of those who are in need of help or deliverance. The concept of the Redeemer has significant theological and spiritual implications in both Jewish and Christian traditions. That's ChatGPT helping
Does
me
it
there.
say see Ruth?
Well, it's right. Well, that's exactly where we're going, isn't it? Yes.
That'll be a nice segue into
it will
that
be a
part
great
when we
segue
get
when
there.
we get to Ruth, because Ruth is a beautiful little picture in 4 chapters of this concept of the kinsman redeemer and a picture of Jesus as well. And not only that, it actually points forward to Jesus. We're going to see that when we get to chapter 4 as well. So we're going to have a lot of fun in Ruth. I think it's one of my favourite little books of the Bible. But before that, we're going to go to Psalm 126, I think.
Yes.
Right, well, as we head into Psalm 126, Becky has another question that kind of links together. We did a podcast last week on the Father as creator, and now we're looking at him as redeemer. So what did you want to say about that?
Well, I'm sure there was intention behind how you've ordered these weeks. But
Around the Father, yep.
Around the Father, but it did seem poignant to look at that idea of God creator or Father creator and now Father redeemer, and that idea of how that links in with what God is doing, that redeeming work that God is doing in creation.
Yep, it's redemption is like recreation. It's like we talked about it in our Creator here at Thirul and at Camden. We did this series, it was only yesterday as we record this, but we talked about the fact that God creates, but humans through their sin decreate, but God is always in that message, that mission to recreate again, to redeem, to put things back right again.
I love that picture.
Yeah, to recreate.
Recreate, I like that.
Yeah.
And I think it links in nicely with Psalm 126 and that beautiful picture of restoration.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful psalm.
And it talks about restoring the fortunes of Zion. But I assume you might have some wisdom on how that might also speak to us today in the world we're living in.
Yep. Well, the Psalm 126 is a psalm that was written at their return from exile. So, which is for the Israelites, for the ancient Jews, this was the ultimate form of decreation, the ultimate form of punishment for their sin was to be exiled away from their homeland, to be away from their temple, really to be away from God's presence. And so complete decreation, like rest, almost like the flood all over again. It uses that kind of language as well. It says when the exile is spoken of by the prophets as like the enemy, the Babylonians and the Assyrians coming in like a flood and decreating. And then at the end of this time, God brings them back. He redeems them. He brings them back. So I think for us, we can catch this psalm is so full of joy. It's about the joy of God's redemption, the joy of God bringing them back. And I think so for us, anytime we feel like our life has been decreated, anytime we feel like we have been overcome by hardship or trouble or disorder, a psalm like this to meditate on and remind us maybe of the times when God has brought us through previous things and then use those to remind us that, hey, he brought me through that.
Yes.
He will bring me through this.
Yes.
He brought me through that Exodus experience. He'll bring me through this Exodus experience as well.
I love that idea of remembering. I think we all need to
we
meditate on what
reminding.
Yes, we constantly need to look back as we look forward and then also be somehow in the present. And I think that idea, that redeeming work is past, present, future.
Great. Tell me more. That's a great little thought there. Tell me what brought that to mind.
Just we can often, I think probably the remembering part is the growth part as well. We have to look to see. I mean, we all can see things in hindsight a lot more than what we're experiencing sometimes in the present. But also, what we're experiencing here in whatever today's challenges might be, or the season that we're in, knowing that God is working for our good, no matter the circumstances, and redeeming the circumstances. We might not see it now. And obviously then might become the season that we're looking back into when we're in the next season.
And you can see what God was doing.
That's right.
Well,
and then the future picture, I think, is where, that bigger picture redemption of God's plan for his creation and for the world, and needing to remember that in this, we get, I know that I get world. In a messed up world, in the bogged down, in the
well, we're going to see that when we get to Revelation too, because people they get afraid by the book of Revelation, whereas once you understand that it was actually supposed to be there to encourage you that God's got everything in order, is a totally different view of it. I love that thought of redemption. Now, even when you said redemption of the past, because I think we can miss the value of that. We think, God just kind of ignores the past and just allows us to move into the future. A picture of redemption is so much more beautiful than that. It's like he weaves the past into the tapestry of the now. So I look at it and think, well, what is in the Bible, according to the Bible, what is the single worst event in human history? And I think if you asked an ancient Jew that, they would tell you, well, that was the sin of Adam and Eve in the garden. That set in motion the rest of the depravity of humanity. And yet that very act of sin becomes the catalyst for the greatest act of grace. So God doesn't just ignore a problem or put right a problem. He somehow redeemings to weave that into. So for these people in exile who've spent all this time, these 70 years completely away from God's presence, it's not like God says, well, now I'm going to restart the clock. I'm going to use all that hardship, all those years of turmoil that you experienced, all that pain and all that grief. I'm actually going to use that to make you a better people. That will actually help you to reflect me more. I think that's beautiful, how only a master creator can recreate a mess and use it for good.
Yes. And I think, and maybe to steal a little bit of a secular terminology, but that idea of the narrative, our life narrative and the way we think about our lives
Yep.
and our stories
Yep.
and putting over that God's narrative can redeem, yes, those past
Absolutely.
and how we interpret them can then help us step into more freedom.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
that's
Rather
kind
than
of-
just ignoring them,
yes,
it becomes part of who we are.
yes.
Yeah.
So-
And that's a beautiful, it's a painful thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, anytime we go through hardship of any kind or trauma, I'm sure that if we didn't have to go through it, we wouldn't. But if we've seen God work in it, so often the hardship I've been through in my life, and I'm not saying I've been through some of the trauma that some of you listening have been faced, but I've walked alongside people who have, and they will say things like, to have come out the other side and knowing what I know now, if I had to go through it again, I would, because
Yes.
it's made me a stronger
Yes.
person. And
God meets us in those places.
in those moments, discover something of God
Yeah.
that you don't see on the mountaintop.
Yes.
You discover God in the
Yes.
valley, you don't see on the
Yep.
mountaintop.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful picture of redemption.
Mm.
Like for these Jews in this, they're full of joy, but it was their idolatry, their consistent putting themselves before God and God's image in other people that led them to exile.
Mm.
Now, the Jews weren't perfect. You see that at the time of Jesus, they're far from perfect. But one thing that they have eradicated from their history when they come back from exile is idolatry.
Mm.
Even though they're selfish and they're still controlling people, there's not a hint of idolatry among the Jewish people. Exile redeemed them from idolatry.
Oh, I've never thought of it like
Yeah,
that.
no, thanks to John Finkelder. He told me that one years ago, but I remember that, and I thought, I've never seen it that way either.
Yeah.
That exile redeemed them from that form of worship of pagan idols. It was never an issue again. But it was. You read the book of Kings and Chronicles, it was constant. So their hardship redeemed something in them, made them a better kind of people in some ways. Yeah.
There's hope for us all.
There's
I
hope.
guess. Mm.
Yeah, that God can redeem us through hardship.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, did you have anything specific else in 126 that stuck out to you?
Oh, look, it's
It's only a simple little
it's
psalm.
it's not one that I have, I've read it before, but for such a short little psalm,
Yeah.
it really does pack a beautiful punch in terms of hope. I think a true hope.
Why don't we
and
read
an
it? Because it's only
expectation.
6 verses.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's just read it. Because if you're listening to this, you might not have read it in your Bible reading plan. Let this, if you're going through some hardship right now, just let this speak to you. When the Lord brought back his exiles to Jerusalem, it was like a dream. We were filled with laughter. We sang for joy, and then the other nations said, "What amazing things the Lord has done for them." Yes, the Lord has done amazing things for us. What joy. Restore our fortunes, Lord, as streams renew the desert. Those who plant in tears will harvest with shouts of joy. They will weep as they go and plant their seed, but they will sing as they return with the harvest. Wow. Love it.
Beautiful.
That's a great little psalm just to meditate on.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, to get to that point where others will say, what great things the Lord has done.
Yes. And I think that gives us expectation when we pray as well.
Yeah.
That God will restore and bring
Absolutely.
joy out of weeping.
Yes, that's right. We reap in tears, sow in tears and reap in joy.
Oh.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Never underestimate what God is doing in our exile moments, in our hard moments, in our painful moments.
Definitely.
And I don't think, you've come from a Baptist background, haven't you?
Well, I've gone from Catholic growing up, but
Yep.
Anglican for a long
Anglican
time,
for a long
then
time,
to
then
Baptist
Baps,
for
yep.
a little bit for
Yep.
church planting, and now here at
And now
C3.
here. So one thing Pentecostals have not always done well is have a good theology of suffering. Because we want to be faith people, but that's been taken to an extreme, and we don't deal with suffering well. Whereas I think certainly Catholics have had a good theology. And it's not to say that that's only a theology of suffering is good either. There has
No.
to be faith and
Yes,
believing that God will break and
absolutely.
bring healing and all that sort of
Yes.
stuff. But we have a tendency to wrestle with one side or the other. And I don't think Pentecostals have always known what to do. And
Well,
so
I think grief is an important part
absolutely,
of our
and that's what's missing in
human
a lot of
experience.
Pentecostal theology.
Yeah, and I
Yep.
think allowing God to be there in the grief
Yeah.
is,
Totally.
important to our deepening trust in Him.
Yeah, we find things about him through that time. I think the Jews call it sitting Shiva or something like that, which
yes,
where they
I've
actually
heard
just
that.
sit with a person. It's what Job's friends do with him.
Don't turn away from the pain.
That's right. I think part of it is you allow them time to grieve prior to the funeral or whatever if they've lost a loved one, and then it's just sitting Shiva. It's just, and I've seen this in Middle Eastern cultures, Lebanese cultures, and so on. They do it as well. They just come and sit with the family, and it's the gift you're giving them is the gift of your presence. You're not saying anything. You're just the gift of your presence.
Can't fix it.
No, you can't fix it. And I think we miss that if we're just trying to always go into God is good, He'll fix it mode.
But sometimes God, I think it's that picture of what God does sometimes in our suffering is He's just that presence with us. He doesn't leave us.
That's right. He never leaves us. He doesn't always fix everything the way we think it should be
Yeah.
fixed. But redemption means He knows ultimately what's best. These people that spent 70 years in exile wondering if, and God was with them in exile, even though they thought that God had abandoned them. And they came back with joy, a changed people.
Wow.
So, yeah, go through hardship. Keep hanging on to God. And if you know others that are going through it, sit with them.
Yes.
Sit with them through it and let God's redeeming work do its job.
Amen.
Excellent. We're going to hit the book of Ruth now.
Sounds
so
great.
4 little chapters. We'll go to Ruth 1.
So Ruth, there's a nice segue from Psalm 126, some of the beautiful pictures that we've seen of God's restoration work. There's definitely some of that coming out in Ruth.
Absolutely.
But just looking at Ruth 1 to begin with, we have Naomi who's lost her husband.
And her sons.
And her sons. It's a time of mourning,
Yes.
death, bitterness.
Absolutely.
She wants to change her name.
She does. She wants to be called Mara, which
I
means
think
bitter.
she's not feeling very hopeful
No.
for the future. I
No.
think she's almost like, my life is done.
Yep. Yeah, there's nothing good left for me now.
Nothing good left.
Yeah.
But obviously she is beloved by her daughter-in-laws, and
Yeah, she
that's
is.
not always the way that it goes.
No, not always. Yeah.
Not always.
Contrary to popular opinion, you see on
Yes.
the sitcoms that it's always the man and his mother-in-law that has a problem.
Yes.
But I've been pastoral ministry for a long time, and I can tell you that more often than not, it's the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law that have
Yeah,
the
it
biggest
can be
relational challenges.
Tricky territory.
Yes, it
so
can
this is an interesting scenario, I think, two daughters who proclaim their love and
Yes.
their devotion to their mother-in-law, but Ruth really
goes
is
next
devoted.
level,
She
doesn't she?
clings. She
Yes.
clings to Naomi.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of an interesting kind of that idea of loyalty, devotion. Those were kind of the themes that I were picked up on in this sort of first chapter.
Yeah, those themes are all through this book. The word that keeps coming up, you'll see it both to Ruth and then to Boaz as well, is noble character or loyal love. I think it's the Hebrew word Ka'il, a bit like Superman. Ka'il, I think that's what I pronounce it, and it literally means this selfless, loyal love that lays down what you want for somebody else. And you see this picture all the time. It's redemptive, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no better picture than that of, I think, usually parent to child.
That's
of
right.
that. Yeah.
Yep, that's right. And in this case, it's really in many ways it's Ruth doing that for Naomi. The mother-in-law, the daughter-in-law is doing it for her mother-in-law.
It is. It seems like a turn of role.
It is. Yeah.
Turning that on its head.
Yeah.
One thing that also I just picked up on, which I don't know if there is any real significance, but it is that idea of the harvest when they do go on their journey back to, firstly Bethlehem.
Yep.
That's an interesting.
Yep. That should tweak us straight away,
location.
shouldn't it?
So that
Yes.
should, as my theology, my time in studying the Bible properly through the Anglican Church is how does this point to Jesus? How does
Yes,
this
that's
point
right.
to Jesus? So Bethlehem for one.
Yep. Absolutely.
And then that idea of the harvest, the time of harvest.
Mm-hmm.
So those are two things that I just thought could be interesting to pick up on.
All right. Tell me about what you think about where's your head going with the whole concept of the harvest then?
Well, that's a time of bringing in.
Yep. Yep.
And
reaping. Yep. Yep.
And that's not without. I mean, I'm not a farmer by any stretch of the imagination, nor a gardener. I'm married to a.
You've been married to a gardener.
I'm married to a horticulturalist.
Yes, that's right.
But in terms of sowing and the work that's put into a crop,
Yep. Yep.
there would be hardship in that. And
For
then
sure.
harvest is
We
a
just
time
read
of
at the end of
reaping
Psalm
and
126,
celebration.
those who reap in tears,
Yes,
sow in
that's
tears, will
right.
reap in joy. That's the principle, isn't it? It's
Yes.
hard work to
Yes.
sow.
So I feel like there's that nice, that big picture of, what's happening in that geographical area, or what's
Yes.
happening in that time and place, is kind of a reflection of maybe what's going to
I see where you're
happen
going.
for these two ladies.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they had gone to, Naomi and her husband and sons had moved from Israel to Moab because of a famine, because of a drought. And interestingly enough, if you look on a Google Map satellite image of Israel and that part of the world, you normally wouldn't move to Moab. If you look at it, just look at it on its map. Most of the greenery is in Israel.
Okay.
Moab is across
I
the
thought you were
Jordan
going to
River.
give us like an equivalent of now. But
Well,
that could be controversial.
Yeah,
Rohan.
that could be. No, we'll stay away from the geopolitical situation. But geographically, the Moab is modern day Jordan, and with a little bit of an exception of a bit of greenery area around the actual Jordan River, it's pretty much desert. It's much more arid than Israel.
Yeah.
So you're in a pretty bad way
That's where you're going
that's
after
where
a
you're
famine.
going
Yeah,
after
yeah.
a famine.
Yeah.
So,
But there was desperation, I guess.
There's desperation, absolutely. And so the story, they moved there, and then to pick up this harvest theme you're talking about, they're coming back again at the end of the harvest. Now, the harvest season was always a time of joy in these agrarian societies. That's why they had parties around them and feasts around them, because it's a time of God's blessing.
Yes.
You've done the hard yards, now you get to celebrate it. How much more when there's a harvest at the end of a famine? You can imagine that this is a great time of excitement.
Yes.
Anticipation, which is, I think that projects forward for us when we, it's a natural physical harvest here, but there's a metaphorical projection forward to. Jesus talked about the harvest, as the great harvest at the end of the age and things like that.
Yeah.
That true redemption is the redemption of souls for the kingdom of God.
It just takes. Naomi's not quite in that headspace
She's
at
not.
this point. No.
But God is faithful even in the middle of that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Despite our feelings about things.
Yep.
He's always doing the work, which is.
Yeah, see, back to that Pentecostal theology, people would go, oh, come on, Naomi, get with the program. You've got no faith there. But true understanding is that God's still working even though she's not expressing this solid, God's got this kind of faith.
Yes.
God still works. He's still faithful even in our mess.
Yes. And then the old Bethlehem.
Yeah,
I feel
Bethlehem.
like when we get to the end of the story, there's that nice, we'll
Right
get to
at the
there
end of Ruth 4.
at the end of Ruth 4. But this is giving us a little hint of, pointing towards our Lord and Saviour.
It is. It's pointing us forward to David, who's born in Bethlehem, and Jesus.
Yes.
So this is a bridge story.
Yes.
Starts in Ruth 1 with, it tells us where it's placed. It says in verse 1, it says, in the days when the judges ruled. So this is a bridge between a time in Israel's history that come in, Joshua's conquered the promised land, and they are screwed up. I mean, they're a messed up people. The judges is a dark time in their history. Everyone's eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Everyone's taking for themselves.
Yes.
Everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. It's a messed up time. It can seem like it's without hope. And this little book is placed there to show that God was still working even in the middle of that, and he's still working out a plan. And it's going to see that when we get to chapter 4, that his plan was to use two ordinary people, Ruth and Boaz, and even Naomi, ordinary woman, to fulfill his plan. That's redemption right there.
Yes. I love that. Great.
Anything else in Ruth 1 that stood out to you?
No, I think that captures, I guess, sets up in terms of how this story plays out.
Yes, that's right. Ruth 1 is just really setting the historical context for it, isn't it? And then the story begins. Really, 2 and 3 are like the meat of the story.
And I think the idea of just picking up again on that idea of land and home, and that is such an important part of that redemptive story.
Yes.
Is our connection to home.
Yep.
And obviously our true home.
Yep, it
with
does.
God.
And we look forward to that home. Hebrews says we are, citizens of heaven. We look forward to that home and that sense of belonging. But, as Christians, I think Christians have often watered this down. I mean, our Indigenous brothers and sisters get this
Yes.
connection to land,
Yes.
this connection to
Yes.
home. And we think we're enlightened because, we don't do that anymore. But that's been the story of humanity throughout the ages, has been a connection with the land.
Yep, we have lost that.
We have lost that, and I think especially in the West we've lost that. And I think rather than being arrogant about that, I think maybe we could have some humility and come back and recognise that there is a beauty in a connection with the land and the history that is
definitely.
there. Yeah. All right, let's head over to Ruth 2.
Fantastic. Okay, so Ruth 2, the plot thickens.
Yes, it does. It's a beautiful story.
It
is.
is.
It's a plot.
I love
beautifully written.
It's a great story.
And if you're listening to it, you can read it in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It doesn't take you a long time to read these 4 chapters.
Wait till you get to chapter 3.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to go there. That's where it gets a little bit
That's right.
confronting. Yeah.
I'll leave that one to you.
Yeah, we'll do that when we get there.
So this is where they're starting to settle back into Bethlehem.
Yep.
Obviously, food is important to survival, and
there's no Centrelink.
There's no Centrelink.
No. So just to put it in context for those that are listening, so Naomi is a widow, and she's an older widow now, and so when she comes home, ordinarily she would need someone to remarry in order to be able to have someone to provide for her in this culture. I know that sounds a bit strange. We'll come to that in Ruth 3, some of the confusion around the culture. And that's partly why Naomi had everything going for her. She could have stayed where she was. She actually could have gone back to Moab.
She had youth on her side.
She had youth on her side. She wouldn't have been hard for her to find a husband and be protected for and be provided for the rest of her life. So her selflessness to say, I'm going to go where you go, your God will be my God, your people will be my people, is actually her showing this Khalil, this noble character, this loyal love for the sake of Naomi, because she knew that if Naomi went home, there's a good chance Naomi's not going to be able to survive.
Yes.
So she's redeeming Naomi by laying down what she wants for the sake of her mother-in-law. And so there's no Centrelink. There needs to be something for these people to survive. That's the background to what we read in the story from here on in. It's just helpful for our listeners to understand some of that background.
No, that's good. That's really helpful. So her Centrelink option is to go out into the fields and basically take the scraps of what she can find.
Yep, the gleanings.
And along the way she meets Boaz.
Yes.
Who, once he finds out who she is, and her story, I think is quite impressed with her loyalty.
He is. In fact, he probably says that about her nobility, her character. Yep, her Khalil.
Her Khalil. There you go. I'm going to remember that. I hope.
I think I've got it right.
She finds favour.
I keep thinking Superman now, but I'm pretty sure it's
I felt like I had a little...
I think it's Kale, actually. Kale, not Khalil. I think it's Kale.
Kale.
Like kale.
Kale.
With a in the front of it. Kale.
Kale.
Yeah, I'm saying Khalil. Khalil's the name of Superman when he's on his home planet.
Yeah.
It's Kale. Yeah.
I like that, Superman. Like how he's a little made
She's a bit of a superwoman.
She is a bit of a superwoman.
Ruth, yeah.
She finds favour in his eyes.
Yes.
Because of her loyalty and humility.
Yeah.
And he rewards that and lets her, take what she needs. She gathers, from what I've read in my little Bible notes of what I'm trying to see it's an ephah.
An ephah.
An ephah. Is
Yep.
that how you say it?
Yep.
Of barley, which apparently
How much is it?
13 kilograms.
Yeah, I thought it was a fair bit. I remember thinking it's a lot
of barley.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
a lot
you'd
of barley.
probably be sick of barley by the end of it,
yeah.
but you'd be happy if
make
you can...
a lot of bread out of that, wouldn't you?
Nice bread. I'd eat that.
Yeah.
I don't know if they had butter in those days, but...
Oh, yeah. I'm sure they would have had butter. I'm sure cows
everything is better with butter. That's my little...
certainly goat's milk. They would have had a lot of goat's milk.
Yes.
And everything is better with butter. You're absolutely right.
I agree.
Yeah.
So she ends up with, Boaz's blessing to go and collect what she needs. He encourages some of his workers to pull out some
over and
stalks.
above. Yeah.
So it's that picture to me, and I don't know, that idea of sometimes we think, and maybe this is more of a Pentecostal way of thinking, but we think we just got the scraps.
Yes.
And God's saying,
Yeah.
I've
There's
actually
more.
got more for you.
Beautiful thought.
And
No, that's a beautiful thought. And that you're right. I mean, that's probably the other end of the spectrum from the theology of suffering. But yeah, Jesus said that. How much more will your Father give you beautiful, good gifts? He delights in giving gifts to his children. Yes. And that we should be excited about.
Yeah.
That he's looking for reasons to bless. Maybe a little bit of history follows on from the fact there's no Centrelink. So this practice that they were doing when Ruth goes out into the field, it comes out of the Levitical law. It's the law of gleaning and harvest. And what would happen is the law told them that when you glean in your fields, when you harvest in your fields, don't harvest right to the edge. Don't take everything. Leave some of it for the poor and the widow and the foreigner and the orphan.
Yep.
So they were actually told to do that. And it's a principle for us. We shouldn't use up everything we have on ourselves. We should have room. The term we say we're going through a poor patch, that's what a poor patch is. It's actually a patch of land that was left for the poor.
Wow.
And it also is when you're beating out your olives, so that's how they would beat the olive tree. It's don't go over it twice. Leave the leftovers that hit the ground for the poor. So the picture is rather than going back and take and make sure you don't miss any, if you don't get it the first time, leave it and trust that God will provide for you as you provide for the poor. And so the poor would come along behind the harvesters and they would literally just glean. They would take.
Wow.
So that's allowed within the law. But this Kail that Boaz is showing is he's actually saying to his workers, when you're harvesting, throw a bit extra on the ground.
Give us some choice
Yeah,
bits.
give us some extra bits.
Yeah.
Yes, like she is such a noble character for what she's done for her mother-in-law. I want you to go over and above and deliberately I just see the harvesters walk along pulling out extras and throwing them on the ground just to be extravagant in their goodness towards this noble woman.
And I'm assuming that probably for a person of his stature was probably not the way it was normally, was
Not
maybe
at all.
begrudgingly given or kind of
Yep. Well, think about it.
minimise what is left
think
behind.
about it in, you think about every movie you've ever seen from ancient times or the Middle Ages and how, if you're going to give money to the alms to the poor, you just do it begrudgingly or just offhandedly without even caring about
Tick
it.
a box.
Tick a box, that's right. And that's human nature. That's that defining what's good
right.
for me. That's taking from the tree. This is a picture of someone who's going, I'm not going to do what's good for me. I'm going to do what's good for others.
Yes.
So this is upside down kingdom.
She's met her match.
She has. They're both perfectly aligned in that way. This is a picture of what Jesus is like. Those who give up their life for me will find it.
Yes.
It is upside down kingdom of God stuff. And it's a picture in a place when there's darkness and everyone is taking for themselves. This is a shining beacon of hope, this story. That throughout history there's always been people in dark times who will live by God's way.
And I'm assuming now that Naomi probably is not going to be changing her name to Mara
anytime
soon.
She's pretty excited, isn't she? She comes back with this effer. She goes, what the heck?
Yes.
I wasn't expecting all that.
I think this may be when the plan begins to, seed in her mind of maybe what could be next.
What's the next thing? Who's next? What's God going to do next? Absolutely.
No, it's a great picture.
Yeah. Anything else in Ruth 2 there?
No, I think that covers, like you say, I think that meeting of minds and that upside down ness of the kingdom and that generosity of heart.
Yeah. So Ruth goes back and she spends the rest of the harvest there. Naomi says, stay there.
Yeah.
Other fields you might get treated badly, like you're saying, but stay near Boaz.
I think that's safety as well. Yes, that's definitely something. The idea of a single woman being out there, there was danger. It wasn't. It wasn't.
Sure, even some of Boaz's employees probably weren't nice blokes either.
Yeah. Rough around the edges.
A bit rough around the edges, but there's obviously a safety there.
Yes.
And that's a part of this redemption process as well. That Jesus brings safety to us, and you see Jesus allowing safety to the woman caught in adultery. I did that with Simon, which will be coming out next week or the week after. Have the conversation around God's grace that Jesus is always extending safety for people in His kingdom.
Hurt.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll head over to Ruth 3.
Okay, so we're at chapter 3, which in my Bible is called Ruth and Boaz at the threshing floor,
Yep.
but I've retitled it.
What have you
to
titled it?
Just The Seduction,
Yes.
as set up by mother-in-law.
Yes. Mother-in-law's doing the seduction,
Yes,
isn't she?
yes.
She's running the show.
She's kind of doing a little makeover. She's saying, Ruth, get your best frock on.
Yeah, get off those morning clothes.
Yeah, that's
get
right.
Your makeup
Go
on,
have a shower,
bit of lippy.
put some perfume, put on your best look, really.
Yeah,
Get
yeah.
your hair done. Which is, it's thinking about that is most daughter-in-laws would probably
I've never
be a
thought
little
of-
shocked with that. But,
Yes.
she's seen an opportunity, obviously, from Boaz's treatment of
Yeah.
Ruth. She's seen his heart.
Yes.
And therefore she's seen something that could be, I guess, assuring their future.
Yeah, that's right.
And
She's seen this could be the answer to
that's
their
right.
future. Yep.
So, I was hoping you could maybe unpack some of the things that happen and what Naomi suggests to Ruth,
Gotcha.
and why it's quite daring and
sure.
controversial if discovered.
Yeah, well, you're right, because we can read this and we can overlay a 21st century lens on it. When we do, if we don't take the time to understand the ancient practices, it'll be one of those what moments that we're talking about here. It's quite confronting. I wrote down in my notes here for this that depending on how you read this story, this chapter, it's either beautifully romantic, it's incredibly creepy that there's an age difference between this
Yes.
older man and this younger woman. It's God at work, or it's a nobility in both of them as they have care for other people. And I think that's where we want to go. But a lack of understanding of this story will lead people to think one, it'll be just confusing.
Yes.
Like, I'll skip over it. But there is a beauty and there is a beautiful picture that we ultimately is fulfilled in Jesus and how Jesus relates to us that if we can see in this story if we take that time. So there is some confusing stuff. Remembering that the principle is, as well as this, we haven't even really touched on it yet. We talked about the principle of gleaning and allowing the poor. There's this other principle, which is the overarching, underlying principle of the entire book of Ruth, and that is another law in the Old Testament called the law of the kinsman redeemer, or the law of levirate marriage, guardian redeemer.
Yeah.
So basically, because of the economic culture, and once again, you've got to place yourself into ancient Bronze Age, because there's no Centrelink, there's no welfare. And in this culture, it's a patriarchal culture. And so it's very difficult for women and children to survive if they aren't under the care and protection of a male.
Yeah.
Now, that sounds incredibly patriarchal, and yes, it is. And, I'm glad we're not in that place anymore where that's the case, because history has shown that, the patriarchy hasn't always done a good job. But in this context, compared to all the nations around where the males of the household basically had complete control, complete say over their wives, and their children were their property, were there to be used however they want. Basically, it was this whole eating from the tree. I can just do what I want. I'm in control here. You serve me and my purposes and what I want to make me feel good. That was not how the Mosaic Law pictured this. The Mosaic Law understood that there was that patriarchal society there, and that the fact was it was very difficult in the economy. There was no welfare system for it to work. So what would happen is if, in Naomi's case, if her husband died, she would not have a source of income. And so what would happen is it would be incumbent on first of all, if a man died and his wife was left a widow, it would be incumbent on the man's next brother in line to marry that woman and have children to continue on that line and continue on that heritage and their connection to land and their financial security and stability. So that does seem foreign to us. And it almost, you can see it's a recipe for going wrong.
Yes.
But if you compare it with what the other nations were doing around about, where a man would just say, I don't want you, and the woman would be out on the streets with no hope of survival, it actually is quite redemptive in that sense. And so what would happen is it would say, if a man died, then the next one would do it. And if it couldn't find the next one, it'd basically be the nearest kinsman redeemer, the nearest family member would be the one who would be obligated to do that. So that's the underlying story.
That protective
That's
kind of
protective
system.
thing. So it does set over 21st century lens. It sounds quite crass, but in that culture, it's actually a good thing. It's the most hope-filled thing that could work in that culture to allow for someone to be provided for and cared for and have a future. So it's worth noting that, and that's that term, the kinsman redeemer. So they're actually buying back the family and the household and the land of that widow. Kids are just hot. Can they? Yep, they're all good. The kids are
all good.
They're all hovering into the kitchen. So that's the background to what's going on in the story. Now, there's some little intricate things that you probably want to ask, like what's going on with the seduction
and
and
putting
all that
it
kind
in
of
that
stuff.
frame. What you've just framed the story with too is obviously being a strongly patriarchal society. This is quite a it is quite a risky move that they're taking to women who are in a vulnerable position.
Yes, once again,
this
they're
could
vulnerable.
go wrong.
Yes, it could.
Their plan could go wrong.
They're making a plan based on the assumption that what they've seen of Boaz is that he has this he has this noble character, and so let's see whether or not let's proposition him and see whether or not he'll take it to the next level.
That's right.
And take it beyond just scattering a few gleanings and actually take us and buy us back and redeem us. Yeah.
Well, it is, Boaz mentions it towards the end, I think, of the chapter, but the whole idea of firstly of Ruth going to the threshing floor, I think no woman apparently should be on the threshing floor.
Yes,
so the fact, do you know why that is?
I don't actually, not off the top of my head. I would have studied it at some point, but it doesn't. I'm not sure why.
Speaks to the patriarchy again,
It
probably.
I think it probably does. I mean, I would imagine this is the threshing floor. The men are hard at work. I wonder if
this is the money
some
floor.
of the goings on. This is like the tradies' workshop.
Yeah. So it could be
debauched,
a little bit debauched.
I think
sort of
potentially
setting.
that could be the setting. That would just be my guess as to why.
So maybe it should be no noble woman should be on
no noble woman should be on the threshing floor. That's right.
Otherwise,
there might have been a few ignoble women on the
another label.
I think you're probably right. Actually, that does make sense. Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit of what's going on here.
So it's it's not a proper environment for someone who wants to keep good character.
Absolutely, her integrity. That she's demonstrated is potentially on the line.
Wow.
And maybe we're going to see that. Look, this is news to me. But I love this thought because if that's the case, that may be why at the end of this chapter he sends her away and says, make sure no one knows you're here. Because he could be, if anyone accuses her of being there, it could throw her integrity.
That's right.
Call her integrity into question.
Yeah.
Wow, I've not thought about it like that before, but that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah. So she's risking a lot to make this work.
Yes.
And she's doing it. It's her mother-in-law again who's asking her to do this.
And she's not familiar necessarily with these Jewish customs either.
That's right.
So she's just following along, trusting her mother-in-law, saying, it'll be okay. Mother-in-law's going, it'll be all right. God's not going to let this rest. It'll be okay. Boaz won't let this rest until it's done.
And then, so not only is she stepping into a context or an environment that's, risky, but then she's telling her daughter-in-law to uncover his feet as he lies down after eating and drinking, probably drunk, let's be honest, in good spirits.
In good spirits, it says, doesn't it? Yep.
He's going to go have a lie down. Then Ruth is to go and approach and cover his feet and lie down, which, could be seen as a seductive move.
Yes.
But we're told that
it seems it's a noble move.
It's a noble move,
yes.
And he discovers her there in the middle of the night when he feels something at his feet and he discovers Ruth. So what's that idea of why do you think he uncovers the feet? Is it to wake him? My thought was, when you're cold.
Yes,
you're stirred. It's not a rough way of,
I bumped the microphone. Didn't tighten the
drop
microphone
the
enough.
mic.
Drop the mic. Mic drop. Yeah, so is it uncovering his feet to wake him up?
Yeah, to sort of.
Now I'm gonna look this up because I'm gonna go off the top of my head and then I'll look it up on ChatGPT. My understanding is that it is a metaphorical request for to come under protection.
Okay.
See, the cloak is the symbol of their authority.
Okay.
Remember, the woman says, "I can just touch Jesus, the hem of Jesus' cloak."
Mhm.
Their cloak was their mantle. It was the thing that they covered, and they would sleep with their cloak over them. So to come underneath the cloak was a picture and a request to come underneath the authority of that one. So it's not like she's putting her hand up his pants or anything like that. It's it could be read that way, but it's not. It's this request to come underneath his authority. Let's see what ChatGPT says, because that's my memory of it without researching it. I just said, what is the significance of Ruth uncovering Boaz's feet? It's derived from the context of the biblical story of Ruth. Oh, I don't need all the details. Thanks. I'll just ask for the basics. I don't need to know who Ruth is. We can skip ahead of that. Now, to understand the significance of Ruth uncovering Boaz's feet, we need to look at a particular episode in the story. In Ruth 3, Naomi advises Ruth to approach Boaz. We know that too. The uncovering of Boaz's feet symbolizes Ruth's humility, submission, and loyalty to him.
Yep.
It signifies her willingness to be under his protection and care. There we go, we're on the right track. In the cultural context of the time, uncovering someone's feet could be seen as a symbolic act of requesting or proposing marriage. By uncovering Boaz's feet, Ruth is essentially expressing her interest in marrying him and him fulfilling his role as her kinsman redeemer. So yes, it is definitely a request for marriage, but we need to think of it not as a request in a sexual way for marriage. It's this whole covering
and servant.
protection.
She says, I'm your
servant. Yes. So it's this, I want to honor you, and I'm requesting that you fulfill your role and provide for me and my mother-in-law. So it suddenly becomes a beautiful thing where what seems like could be creepy is actually has a beauty to it when it's put in its context.
It actually brought to mind for me, and I might be totally jumping the gun, but as I try to point towards Jesus, but another story in the New Testament when Mary comes to wash.
Oh yes, I think there's
Jesus'
a similarity
feet
there.
in
Yes,
perfume, and again, kind of an interesting picture of well,
Well, the Pharisees looked at it and went, "What's all that
what
about?"
What is she doing? But again, it was that submission before Jesus, and
Jesus says she has done a beautiful thing for me.
Yes. Again, he's redeemed that picture.
He's redeemed a picture that, because depending on whether there's one Mary or two Marys in the story, and different Gospels have different things about this anointing, but at least in one of them, Simon the Pharisee says, if this man was really a prophet, he would know the kind of woman that she is, that she has lived an unscrupulous life in the town. And so Jesus then turns around and says, she has done a beautiful thing for me. That's redemption.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
Gosh, thankfully Jesus just, forget,
Yeah.
lets our sin be.
Totally. I was listening to a podcast last night, actually, and the guy was saying, I was on my way home from church last night, and he was saying, I'm getting more and more comfortable with the fact that Jesus disappointed everyone. In fact, as you read the Gospels, the only person Jesus didn't disappoint is the Father.
Yeah.
Because he lets people down because he is so radically different in his treatment.
Yeah.
Even his own disciples get disappointed by the way he treats certain people. But he's on a radically different mission, and no one gets it. And then they were talking about Jesus being the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and I think we'll probably look at that in Revelation, actually. And we all go, oh, it's great Jesus is a lion, but you don't keep lions in cages.
No. It's that picture of Aslan, isn't it?
It's Aslan in C.S. Narnia. Yeah, exactly.
Good, but he's not.
He's dangerous.
Dangerous.
Yes, that's
not
right.
Safe or.
Yeah, exactly. And that's Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's this redemptive story that Jesus is radically different to what we think and what we would expect.
The other thing that comes to mind when I look at what they're doing is quite radical, and they have good intentions. They have integrity.
Yes.
And often we can all be in situations where our actions can be seen as or be questioned as to why we're doing something a certain way, or we perform to what we think people's expectations are of us.
Yep.
But that idea of integrity and acting in what we know God is wanting us to do and not worrying about what other people think.
Yes, yeah.
To me is, as a trying to reform as a people pleaser, I think that's hard to do because we do want to do what, we want to be seen to be always doing the right thing in the eyes of people and not necessarily what God calls us to do. And sometimes he is asking us to do something that on the surface is like, what are you doing? But he's got a plan for
There's
that.
a redemptive plan behind it that somehow looks uncomfortable.
Yes.
That's right. And that's this story, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right there.
The turning upside down is,
Yeah, the upside down kingdom.
Yep. Countercultural.
Sure.
The other thing I found interesting, and it again speaks to, it speaks to, I guess, the age difference, but Boaz is really grateful for what Ruth has done.
Yeah, he's probably got a pretty good wicket out of it.
Yeah, I know. So, yeah.
That's right. Sorry, being too bit
So is it just that gratitude is purely because she's giving an old fella a chance and of a new life, or is there more to it than that?
I'm sure he thought it, he's got this beautiful young woman. I'm sure there's a part of that. He's a man. I'm sure that's there. But I think he is, if you look at what he says in verse 10, he says, the Lord bless you. This is after the whole uncovering thing. You are showing even more loyalty, family loyalty, than you did before, for you have not gone after a younger man, whether rich or poor. You're not looking out for yourself. You could have. You could have had anybody, but you've chosen me. I don't deserve this.
And he would understand she's looking after
he would understand.
Naomi too.
That's exactly right. And that's what he's commending her for. He's going, and the fact that he can call her my daughter shows there's an age difference there. But he is saying, you could have any bloke you want, and you're going to pick wrinkled old me, but you're doing this because you have shown an even greater nobility of character. It's one thing to go around gleaning for your mother-in-law. Now you're actually prepared to give up life with some young, handsome hunk because you want to redeem and buy back your families, and that's the nobility of it. So I think he respects that deeply,
and I think she doesn't go away empty-handed.
No,
he's like, here I don't know what 6 measures would be of barley, but
I have heard it before, but I can't remember exactly. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yes, it is a lot.
I think that says a lot about his generous nature again.
Yeah.
But that would be, I guess, very reassuring for them to know that they are going to be looked after right from the get-go.
Definitely. And this is a big step up. I mean, there's no guarantee that just because he's, letting her glean, that it's a big step from letting someone glean in your field to being your wife.
Yes.
It's a huge step up. So there was a gamble on their part in this. It could have backfired. I think we need to think about that. That, this is a proposal that there's no guarantee it's going to happen.
No. And as we read on in the next chapter, it's not guaranteed that Boaz...
No, it's not even guaranteed that he will do it. Because
or can
he
do
says,
it because of the legality
of it. He actually says, I might not be able to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I will if I can, but I might not be able to. So there's no guarantees here.
Yeah.
It's a gamble, but they're trusting God all the way through it.
Yeah.
Maybe God's in the middle of this. Yeah.
Great.
So we're going to move on to chapter 4 now, where we see the outcome.
Fantastic. Let's do it. Okay, so we come to the conclusion of this 4-chapter story.
We have a crisis moment, and now we need to see the resolution of that crisis moment. Yep.
It's reached a climax, and, just at the end of chapter 3, Boaz has promised, he will not rest until the matter is settled that day. So we see him now go into action, and it's this idea, and something you've already touched on, this idea of the guardian redeemer, the patriarchal society, the attachment to land. Again, this idea of the importance of land.
Yeah, well, it was so important, the family land thing, that it was supposed to be that every Jubilee, every 50th year, the land would revert back to its family of origin. So if they fell on hard times, they sold themselves. They actually sold the land, but they never sold it indefinitely. They sold it for a value up to. So if it was sold 50 years out, it would be worth the full 50 years of harvest. But if it was only 10 years left, the value of the land would be less because they're only getting 10 years of harvest. Then it has to revert back to the family of origins. That was part of God's economy, to great equalizer, to make sure that the rich wouldn't just keep getting richer and the poor wouldn't keep getting poorer. Sadly, there's no history, no evidence in Jewish history, in Israelite history, that they even ever obeyed that law.
Wow.
They should have, but they didn't. But that was part of God's equality economy that we see in the Mosaic law. So, it was supposed to revert back.
Because there's also, and this is something I don't fully understand, but the idea that, so Boaz, he hunts down this other relative that is first in line.
Yep. He's obviously a closer relative in some way.
Yes,
Yep.
and in order to maintain the name of the dead, there's the idea of that he has to maintain the property as well. But then this guardian redeemer, this potential guardian redeemer, says, I can't redeem it because I might endanger my own estate.
Yep.
So there's something related to this complexity there as well.
Yeah.
Is there of if you own another land and then you take on somebody else's, that it's in
Yeah,
jeopardy.
I haven't looked into exactly what it means, but I think even if just based on the whole Mosaic law, I think probably what he's saying is if I take this and buy this and this goes belly up,
Yeah.
I stand to lose the rest of my
Yeah,
estate as
okay.
well.
Yeah.
If this falls flat on its
Yeah.
face, I could have implications
Yeah.
for the rest of my family and
Yeah.
my household.
Okay. Yeah.
But which once again, it's doing. I mean, if he had been doing what he should have been doing, this other redeemer should have redeemed.
Yeah.
Because he was expected to. He
Yeah.
chose not to.
Yeah.
Which is obviously the divine redemption power of
Yes.
God, that he had Boaz in mind the whole time.
Yeah.
But I think that's what's going on. He's saying, if this goes belly up, I'm going to lose my other estate. And he goes, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to look after myself.
Yeah.
His attitude is, I'm not going to help her.
No.
It's too risky for me.
And obviously, we don't know all the background to much of this character, but maybe Naomi does know of him and sees that Boaz is actually a better option.
Yeah.
Because we've seen the character of Boaz, that if anyone's going to be a champion for them,
Yeah.
it's not going to be that guy.
No,
it's
that's
going to
right.
be Boaz.
So we don't see what's going on there, but you'd have to think that if this guy's closer than Boaz, she would know who he
Yes.
was.
Yes.
Yeah, that's left hanging. You're right.
Yeah.
It's like she's probably going, Lord, not that one.
Who am
Please,
I?
not that one.
Hedging my bet here.
Yeah.
But
Let's
look,
just ignore him and hope that
it all
Boaz-
thankfully does work
It
out.
does work
and, you know, sandals are removed.
Yes, sandals are removed and
It's
faces are
interesting, the whole
spat in.
feet thing. It seems to be a very important.
It was very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's dirt involved.
Yes.
There's cleanliness. The whole washing of feet in Jesus' time,
Yeah.
it's still there. I mean, we're
Yeah.
walking around in sandals and dirt, dusty roads. Yeah, and everything else on the road. So there's a lot of feet.
Yeah.
You could do a theme on feet,
We
actually,
could.
through the whole Bible.
We could.
It's
we
definitely
could.
there.
It's definitely a thing.
Yeah.
So they do exchange, in front of elders and witnesses.
Yeah.
Who are the witnesses?
And this story, what happens is once Boaz does it, there's this exchanging of sandals. This is actually a sanctified story of what's supposed to happen. Because in the Mosaic law, when this kinsman redeemer thing happened, it was supposed to be that if someone wouldn't redeem, you were supposed to go off, take off their shoe and spit in their face, as if to say, this is what happens to anybody who doesn't do what they should do. So they've
Wow.
actually sanctified it a little bit and just got, let's just make it a transaction of sandals. But there was supposed to be this deep shame for a person who wouldn't fulfill
Okay.
the redeemer role.
Wow.
Yeah. So this story waters that down a bit
Yes.
and tends not to focus so much on the shame of the guy who won't do it,
Yes.
but focus on the fact that
Yeah.
God was working behind the
Yes.
scenes to bring about Boaz into the equation.
And I guess the mercy that
That's
Boaz,
right. Yep.
shows.
Yep,
So,
for sure.
Then comes the nuptials. The marriages, the elders are, blessing their union. It's happy days for everybody. It's a happy ending.
Yes, it is a beautiful happy
it's
ending.
A
There's a
beautiful
baby born.
baby is,
There's a new
yep,
a
a
new
son.
grandson for Naomi, like a son for Naomi again.
Yeah, so she's a happy grandma.
Yeah.
And I don't know how, we don't get a sense of how much time has taken, but I assume it's over one season of harvest.
I would
really.
imagine it's pretty quick. Yeah,
So
I would
it's a
imagine it's all happened pretty quickly.
turning, they're
Yeah.
turning, I was going to say turning a frown upside down.
It
but
certainly did turn a frown upside down very quickly. It turned Mara bitterness into Naomi
Yes.
joy, definitely. Yeah.
and I like this idea, then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. Naomi has a son and they
Yep.
named him Obed.
Yep.
He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And then we get a little bit of a genealogy of David.
Yep.
And then
Perez was the father of Hezron. I know this off the top of my head.
Okay, go.
Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Aminadab. Aminadab, the father of Nashon. Nashon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz. Boaz, the father of Obed. And Obed, the father of David.
Jesse.
Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David. Yeah, I was just getting too cocky there,
Not
wasn't
that
I?
I want to be picking
No,
you up, but
you're right. Jesse, the father.
but it's getting, this is getting to, it's pretty close to some, juicy times. And obviously going from judges to king,
Yes,
being ruled by
that's right.
kings.
That's why this is a bridge story.
Yes.
In a time of mess, and this actually links us all the way back again, all the way back to the patriarchs. Jacob. It begins with Perez, but Perez is the son of Judah. So you've got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, Perez, and so it's linking it all the way back there. And interestingly enough, too, Perez there's also another link that's worth noting. In this story, Ruth is put up as this woman of noble character. We didn't really touch on it, but she's a Moabitess. She's from Moab. Now, back in the law, it says no Moabite is allowed to enter the family of Israel until 10 generations. There was no love lost between these two peoples. When Israel came out of the Exodus, they wanted to go to Moab, and they had a big punch-up, basically, a big fight, and there was no love lost between them. They had a great disdain. So the very fact that this woman from this foreign nation who was looked down on and scorned, she was like a Samaritan woman in the same way that Jesus reaches out to the Samaritan woman. This picture is picked up. But back to Perez. Perez is the son, one of the two twin sons that's born to Judah via Tamar, who was his daughter-in-law, that he sleeps with and she pretends to be a prostitute.
Yeah.
So there is a direct link between Tamar and Ruth as both women who you would not think
Outliers.
They're outliers. They wouldn't belong and shouldn't belong in the redemptive plan of God. And yet God actually puts them in there, and they're in the genealogy in the New Testament of Jesus. Yeah. So I love that.
It says a lot about...
And Bathsheba's in there as well.
Yes.
So you've got Tamar. I mean, is it Philippa Gregory or someone has the story of these women? She's written fictional stories about these women. So but you've got Tamar, Bathsheba, Ruth, Rahab. Rahab's the other one who's in the story as well. And Rahab is at the time of Nashon, so she's in there too. I think Rahab actually marries one of these guys as well. So in that genealogy are 4 women who shouldn't belong, according to the patriarchy. They should belong, and yet God's showing us something of His redemption in this. He can take mess,
His generosity.
Yes, it's a magnificent story.
And we have already spoken, I guess, but to how this is pointing to Jesus.
Yes.
I mean, one of those is very much clearly this genealogy of God's purpose and plan. And
so you take this genealogy here and you can almost overlay it as a subsection of Luke's genealogy. It's right there. So it's like he carbon copies it straight out of here.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's done his Old Testament homework.
He's done his Old Testament homework, and he includes that to the genealogy moving forward.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess, Jesus is our ultimate guardian redeemer as well.
He is.
You know.
Yeah, he is the kinsman redeemer.
Yes.
And so when we think of redemption, Jesus is the one who buys us back and redeems us. And there's other stories of redemption. There's going to come another one later. In fact, Jeff Baxter told me yesterday he's going to preach on this in a few weeks' time on the story of Mephibosheth, when King David actually redeems Mephibosheth back. And it's a redemption story that all points forward to Jesus.
Awesome.
Yeah, so there's some great pictures. And then the New Testament writers pick up on that, and they see Jesus as this redemptive character. Yeah. Yeah, great
story. Packs a punch.
It does. So we'll head over to Revelation now. Let's go there.
Okay, now on to a much avoided book.
Much avoided book. This is true.
Revelation. It is a weird and wonderful book. It does feel like it belongs in the Old Testament in terms
It kind of does, doesn't it? It fits better with some of the Old Testament literature.
It's not one that I would willingly pick up and read, I must say, unless we've been doing a series at previous churches, because it's hard to understand. It's a lot of symbolism. And I guess one of the questions, just to, kick us off is not why do we avoid Revelation, but how should Revelation be read in general as a book, do you think?
Good question. I think that's a really good question. And my view on how that should be read has definitely changed in the last few years. In the last 5 years, I have really morphed. I was raised on very avid, what they would call futurist view or dispensationalist view, and that is that with the exception of chapters 1, 2, and 3, which was written to a group of churches in Turkey at that time, the rest of it is all about a plan, a prophetic vision for the future, things that will happen at the end of time. So I was raised on that, and was a big fan of the Left Behind books that,
Oh, yes.
still make a great read, but I enjoyed reading. I look back now,
Cheesy American movies.
The original movie was just dreadful. Actually, I don't think Nicolas Cage's one was even any better either. But the books were huge best-selling books of their time. I've since read them in more recent years too. Well, going back 5 or 6 years. And I realised they're actually not that great.
Yes.
Jerry Jenkins has written some other stuff, but they're really not that great, enthralling. Although I enjoyed them at the time. But I was raised on Left Behind theology about that this was all to do with the future. What I have come to believe myself, and I would probably find I'm not going to part company with people who would differ, but I'm much more comfortable now with seeing that this was actually, the whole thing was written to these people at the time. So this letter was supposed to bring a sense of encouragement, not despair, to these 7 churches in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, who were suffering persecution under the Roman Empire and were unable to have a degree of freedom in their world. They, even to the point where they were forced to buy and sell on the black market. There's a little hint to some of the things we'll see in the book of Revelation. So a lot of these things that we think are quite confusing. Apocalyptic. We'll come back to the word. Yeah. Remind me to come back to the word apocalyptic in a minute. But those things are actually made a lot of sense to these people. This whole, we talk about the one world government and all that sort of stuff. You got to realize, to these people at this time, they already had a one world government.
Yes.
They already had a king who was claiming to rule over everything, who was telling them, controlling what they could do and what they couldn't do, who controlled how they could buy and sell. So all those things that we project into the future actually very much apply to these people at this time.
Okay.
So as I've done that, I've started to realize that this book should not be read predominantly in the future. And you can read it as patterns or cycles of human behavior, that human sin leads to the future. But if we now read it through the lens of what are the particular things that are happening. Now, we're not reading today the opening chapters, but I think this is actually the first time in the podcast we've addressed the book of Revelation. So, and I'll probably come back to it later on when we do other parts of the book. But when you see the opening chapters, the Lord has 7 different things to say to 7 different churches.
Yeah, right.
So even when we say, what's the Lord saying to the church today? As if God's saying one thing to the entire church. Well, he may be doing something grand in the world, but I think God has specific things to say to each different congregation based on their behaviour. So there's some churches there that are persecuted deeply, and the word is stick with it, stay in it. There's other churches there that have succumbed to the Roman Empire. They've succumbed to empire.
Which we see in a lot of the other letters.
Which we see in the other letters as well. That's right. They've compromised on their faith, and they have actually become complicit with the empire. And so there's rebuke there. And so if we think about those 2 things especially, then we bring it forward, bring the rest of the book forward. The question as we read the rest of the book of Revelation needs to be for us, 1, where are we complicit with empire? Where in our life, and when I by empire, I mean the empires of this world, the patterns of this world, the Babylons,
culture.
the culture, and all of these things, the Egypts, the Babylons, and the Romes. In fact, in this book, it's called Babylon, but it's talking about Rome, the Roman Empire. So, and the empires of this world are always that way inclined. They're always defining the elite, the rich. The elite are treating and mistreating the poor, treating them poorly. And that's why Jesus comes along as the upside down kingdom. He does it differently. So where are the 2 questions for us as we read it is, where are we complicit with empire? And second, if we're being persecuted, how should we view our persecution? And what you see in this book is very different to how most Christians are dealing with their persecution today. Most Christians today are shouting back and demanding freedom from their persecution. Yes. Especially when I say most Christians, I mean most Western Christians. Yeah.
So they're overreaching.
Overreaching, claiming more for ourselves. We're actually trying to We're actually operating under the kingdom of empire ourselves. We want to rule. We want to control. And Jesus says, no, you give up control. In fact, Peter wanted Jesus.
We are the fringes.
We're on the fringes. So Peter wanted Jesus to go into Jerusalem and do what messiahs are supposed to do, which is defeat the enemy. Jesus, you need to go in there. And he goes, get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Jesus' messianic way of doing things was not empire. It was actually laying down his life.
Yes.
And so that's the call of this book. Now,
But you say he disappointed because
he wasn't what they
he
expected.
wasn't the general, the army
that's right.
general.
Yeah.
Yep.
And since I have learned to read this book that way, it's actually a really enjoyable read. The fear factor goes out of it, and it's quite challenging. It makes me ask questions of my own areas where I'll not be complicit, and it also encourages me. So back to what the word apocalypse means. If you Google the word apocalypse right now, you're going to get Bruce Willis smashing into the moon and the meteors coming at the earth, and you might get the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which is in this story. But the word apocalypse has become synonymous with the end of the world.
Yeah.
And we love post-apocalyptic stories and movies and all that sort of stuff. That's the whole genre of modern movies. But the word doesn't mean that.
No.
The word just simply means an uncovering.
Yes.
To unveil.
Yes.
And so the apocalypse, it means, in fact, the very first word, it wasn't even called Revelation until a few hundred years ago. It was called the apocalypse. You go back to the old versions, it's just called the apocalypse, the unveiling. And so what the story is about is talking to these 7 churches who are going through a difficult time and saying, let me unveil and show you what's going on behind the scenes. Let me show you a bigger picture.
Yeah, I was feeling when you were talking before that idea of dropping the curtain. And
seeing what's going on. That's exactly what an apocalypse is. It's like, let me show you what's happening behind the scenes. And instead of being a frightening thing, that's supposed to be an encouraging thing. It shows you that God is still working in and through this situation. You think this is the persecution, but let me show you how it all is being orchestrated.
Yeah, it's not out of God's control.
It's not out of God's control. And that is partly why it should be seen as a pastoral, encouraging letter rather than a challenging letter. And it's also a genre. It's a specific genre, a theopocalyptic or something.
Okay.
It's very similar to Ezekiel. Like you said, it belongs in the Old Testament. Zechariah is the same style of prophetic writing as this. It's not supposed to be forth-telling. It's not supposed to be foretelling the future.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be forth-telling. It's showing what's going on behind the scenes.
As at that time as well.
At that time. Yeah, not all the future.
No.
Yeah. But we've missed that.
That's
so to put it back in that context and go, what did this mean to them? That then helps me to say, what does it mean to me?
That's really
so
helpful.
Just a bit of an introduction to the book of Revelation,
I think that does help as we, I guess, unpack some of the
strange symbolism. These chapters are full of it, aren't they?
I think when I was, preparing for this podcast and looking at, firstly reading Psalm 126 and then Ruth, it was like, it's very easy to see how this relates to this idea of Redeemer, Father Redeemer. And then I got to Revelation, I was like,
where does this fit?
I'm not, it's hard. It's harder work.
Yeah. Why did I pick Revelation in the Redeemer theory? Yeah.
But then also coming back to this idea of Creator, Redeemer, and the idea that God is redeeming creation. And maybe I'm, feel free to, not answer this and decide to answer this maybe at another time. But the idea of heaven. And this, something that I've been reading recently, and this idea of, like you say, you talk about unveiling and what an apocalypse is, and people talk about end times and all of those things. But is your picture of from your understanding of what heaven will look like, it's a renewal of earth rather than we all have this picture of floating in clouds.
Yeah.
But it is that redemptive work, and it is that restoration work of the earth and of us, body and soul.
I agree.
And now your little intro and those sort of thoughts, it helps me maybe understand a little bit more about how this is talking about that bigger redemptive work
that's right.
That God is doing.
Redemptive on the earth.
And in the present.
Yep.
As well as
it's not just the future.
That's right.
Yeah. God, this whole creation, recreation thing, and then ultimately Revelation ends with the new creation.
Yes.
And that's right. It's the new creation, the full redemption of creation is not an obliteration of the past and then living in heaven. It's the unification of
Floating
heaven and
around
earth.
with wings.
No, it's not that. That's right. That's a relatively new thing in church history.
Yeah.
You ask most kids today, what happens when you die? Oh, if I'm a Christian, I go to be with Jesus in heaven when I die. That's actually, we've been so indoctrinated by that, but that's not what the New Testament says.
No.
The New Testament spends far more time talking about the reunification of heaven and earth, that somehow God will put right this earth. Otherwise, what's the point in the earth? Is it a failed project that just God does away with, or does God refine it and ultimately bring about new creation? And the story of the Bible is God creates, and he continues to recreate despite our decreation. Yeah. And now
on
we
the microscopic daily level to this.
Every little day, the little things we do, everything we're facing, which is what these churches were facing in persecution and the little areas of their economy and how to live and how they interacted with people, not just on the grand cosmic scale, but in everyday life. These little microcosms of Christians who would be redemptive in the work that they did in their community, so that, how do I put it? God has started pockets of new creation on the earth to prepare the earth for recreation, for the ultimate new creation. Yes. So we are new creation creatures who are supposed to do creation work on the earth in preparation for the final recreation of the earth. Lots of with the word creation there. That's a very different picture, this sense of, well, what's the point of doing anything on the earth? Because let's just go to heaven. It's not what the New Testament's about. No.
It does. It brings, intention to today and to now.
Yes.
The other thing, just because, it is, some of the pictures are kind of like a bit disconcerting, and, you can be a bit fearful looking at things like this if you've got that, what you think, what our normal understanding of apocalypse is from those terrible movies.
Yes.
And
it's right. You're thinking like Walking Dead and
end time prepping and all of that, which has infiltrates churches. Something again that I've been reading about in my own time and in a book that I'm reading at the moment is, I guess the end times and the idea of end times isn't necessarily that bleak apocalyptic picture all the time. There is this sense in terms of what is said in the word of, life will be going on. It will continue.
Jesus
and
said that.
And
right up to the end,
that's
he said.
right.
Yep.
So not to be, I guess, to take fear out of it as well as we just trust in what God's doing.
Yeah.
I guess that's my hope as we
go through this, hopefully we can take the fear out, because that has been, most people won't read it because it's scary.
Yes.
It's not supposed to be scary. It's supposed to be encouraging and challenging.
Right. Well, should we get
let's
cracking
do
into
it.
chapter 5?
All right, go for it.
So the scroll and the lamb, I'm not gonna be doing a lot of my own sort of thoughts, because I feel like I've got to
I'm
going to hand it all over to you.
I won't have all the answers either without
that's
Googling,
okay.
but I can have a crack at a
So
few
there's
things.
this idea of the scrolls.
Yep.
So then I saw that in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. I'm not talking about seals from the ocean.
No, not those
We're
sort of
talking
seals.
about the seals of, I guess,
A wax seal.
A wax seal.
That would seal up something with authority, an official seal. Yep.
That's right. We've got a picture of the lion and the lamb, which I do love that picture of how it points to Jesus of being a lion and a lamb.
Well, actually, it's even more than that. Where is that? We see the lion and the lamb. Is that in this chapter? Yes,
it is in this chapter.
It is in this chapter. So
according to my notes.
watch this. It's in verse 4.
There we go.
Oh, well, so what happened? Should we just? I'm trying to think how we want to do it. Let me just deal with the concept of the lion and the lamb.
Yeah, please.
It appears a few times in this Revelation, and each time it's like John hears something. So he says, "I began to weep." Verse 4. I began to weep bitterly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll and read it. But one of the 24 elders said, "Stop weeping. Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has won the victory. He is worthy to open the scroll and its 7 seals." So this elder has said to John, "Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah." Now John's going to turn around and look. What's he expecting to see? He's expecting to see a lion.
Yeah.
And what he sees instead, verse 6, is then I saw a lamb. So each time he has this sense, he's expecting to see a lion, but each time he expects to see a lion, he sees a lamb. He's expecting to see rule and noble and kingship and authority, and he sees a lamb that is slaughtered. So there is a dichotomy between the two. And that in itself tells a story that the way to lionship is through lambship. That Jesus shows how he becomes the lion. He is the lion because of selfless giving up his life.
Upside down.
Upside down kingdom. That's
Absolutely.
right. That's the picture that's coming through all the way through here. Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, so that's lion and lamb.
So what's the idea of the scrolls, do you think?
So I think, because we should say in the book of Revelation, you can pretty much go back to Old Testament books on every analogy, every page, the 7 seals and the 7 lampstands and all that. It's
so
all
7
Old Testament.
is obviously a holy.
That's the number of completion or fullness.
Yes,
Yes, anytime you see that, it's
wholeness.
Wholeness. It's the number of absolute completeness, fulfillment. So that's there. That number 7 appears. John loves the number 7 in this story repeatedly. But if you take a scroll back, there's pictures in Zechariah of scrolls. There's pictures in Ezekiel. These prophets who are actually of the same genre, this apocalyptic genre as well.
This is symbols that would be very familiar to a Jewish
person. Yeah, that's right. A Jew would understand this. So my understanding of a scroll, if I go back to some of these Old Testament prophets, is that a scroll is supposed to be a metaphor or a picture talking about the history of the world, what's really going on, being stored and written down on this scroll. The plan of God for the ages is written on this scroll, and this scroll has been now sealed up. And so these people are going, how does this work? We're under persecution. We're suffering here. This doesn't make sense. And so there's the picture for them of, there is actually a scroll that explains it all. There is a scroll, and this scroll needs to be apocalypsed, needs to be opened up, unveiled. And who is going to unveil this scroll that has been sealed with these 7 seals? They want someone to unveil it. You can see John going, I want to know the answers. And I can't find anybody who's worthy to apocalypse the scroll. And then, of course, Jesus can unveil this scroll.
Wow.
So it is a picture of the explanation of what's really going on. That's what the scroll represents, I think.
And that just came to mind, and it could be far out thought, but does that link in with that idea of the tree of at the beginning of time of knowledge of
good and evil?
I don't know, that idea of only Jesus can unpack. Only God should really have access to that knowledge. I don't know.
Yes, it does. So that's a really good thought there. See, I don't think we think of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. See, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was there to give them wisdom.
Yeah.
It's not that wisdom's bad.
No.
The intention seems to be in the scriptures that God always wanted us to know good and evil, to know right and wrong.
In relationship to Him.
In relationship to Him. The question is, will we trust that what He says is good for us, is right for us, rather than thinking we know best? Yes. So, yes, this is another picture of that, is that if you will trust me, I will in time give you wisdom.
Yeah.
I will show you what's right and wrong.
Yes.
And so, yes, the true knowledge, that makes great sense. That this is like God saying He is the one who is worthy to eat from the tree
if you
and
haven't got
feed
it
us the fruit of the tree. If you haven't already got it, that's right. If you haven't got it yet, He's the one.
Here's another message.
He's
for
another
you.
one right near the end of the book to remind you that,
Yeah.
hey, I want you to have wisdom. I want you to see what's going on, but you've got to trust me that I know what's best for you, not what you think's best for you. And that would have been very encouraging to these people. Oh, there is the Lord does have the scroll.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not in the hands of Caesar.
Yes.
It feels like Caesar's got control of our destiny, but he doesn't. Yeah. And there's tremendous persecution during the times of this. Depending on when the writers write this, when the scholars think this was written, it was either written in the 60s or the 90s.
Okay.
But you've got Nero who basically burned.
Yes,
he was
a villain of the story.
He was a villain, all right, for sure. Domitian was another one he was the one who actually taxed. So what Domitian did was he's the one who put the buying and selling. So at the forecourt in the agora of Ephesus, which was a major trade center, he thought, I can't actually tax everybody because the people won't like me. So what I'm going to do is the agora, the trade center, this trade route in Ephesus was where all the spice trade would come from the east, from the east. All of the Indian and Middle East and saffron, all that sort of stuff would all come from there, and it would be there. The east and west would meet at this place in Ephesus. It's like Turkey today, it's Istanbul further up the road. But at Ephesus, it was the time where this would happen. It was the meeting of east and west. And so what he did is he built a whole lot of temples in this agora at Ephesus, and he basically said, you can't buy and sell here unless you make an offering to Caesar. And so you had to actually pledge your allegiance to Caesar before you could buy and sell there. Now that was why they were being persecuted, because they couldn't, the Christians couldn't do that.
No.
They wouldn't pledge allegiance to Caesar. So that forced them
Out of the marketplace.
into the black market. So in order to survive, they had to have hiked up prices and all that sort of stuff. Now, if you know that, and you read later on in the book of Revelation about buying and selling and all that,
that makes
suddenly it makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, it's actually then in their day. It makes perfect sense to them. It's not about the future. It's about in their day, they were taxed out of the market because they would not bow them. And some evidently did. Some probably did compromise and go, oh, well, I'm just going to pledge allegiance to Caesar. And the call is, don't do that.
Yes.
Don't do
So
that.
I guess that's where what we can take from that. It might not be that exact
not that,
scenario,
but
but there's...
Well,
God
talk about
sees it all.
buying and selling. Where do we pledge allegiance to empire? Where do we walk into the cheap shops and buy clothes that's convenient for us that have been built on, made on the back of sweatshops in foreign countries? That's pledging allegiance to empire.
Yes.
So that should challenge us about these sort of things. This has radical implications for today, for us too, that we just take for ourselves.
That's right.
And it's very easy for us to do it because we don't think about the supply chains.
No.
But there's an economy behind that, and that's the kind of stuff that Revelation speaks to.
And I guess it's speaking to that importance of what we do in the here and now.
It matters.
Not just this idea of, oh, well, we don't have to care about the environment because
That's right.
there's heaven.
But
It's like,
because
actually,
this is
no,
all going to burn
it
up
matters.
anyway. It does matter.
It matters.
For a Christian, our everyday little choices matter. They have tremendous impact because we are the new creation on the earth. Yeah. So if we suddenly it brings the revelation to life in a that's the challenging bit. It's encouraging, but it's also challenging. Where are we complicit with empire? Yeah. So that's the scroll.
Sounds
He's
like
got
a
it.
Star Wars.
It's
Complicit with Empire.
complicit with empire. That's
I'm
right.
a Star Wars fan.
Yes, me too.
Good to know.
More of a Star Trek fan, but I don't know what Star Wars is. I'm a Trekkie.
That's another episode. I'm not a Trekkie.
Oh, I'm a big Trekkie.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Says a lot. No, I'm joking. I don't know what it says. Well, that really does. That's really helpful to unpack, some of these pictures that are a bit, aren't easily translatable right from the get-go. I do love, it ends, there is a nice picture of this idea that, every creature in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and on the sea, and all that is in them, saying, to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honour and glory and power forever and ever. And
that's
the four living creatures.
Apocalypse right there. It's an unveiling of what's really going on.
And that's a nice picture, again, of, God's plan for all corners of the earth to be rescued and to be redeemed.
Yep.
I guess the little kid in me also says, does that mean there are going to be animals in heaven? That was something.
It's a good question.
Something that my kids asked.
Yeah, that's a good question there. Well, Jesus, it says in Colossians 1, he redeems all creation.
Yes.
So,
yes.
So, once again, you see, the thing is there going to be animals in heaven? What we're seeing here is what's happening in heaven, but the goal is heaven and earth reunified. So what happens in heaven happens on the earth, and what happens in the earth happens in heaven. That's how we should be picturing this.
Yep.
So I don't think you can form a hard, fast doctrine one way or another.
Good to know. Good to know.
But I don't think you should rule it out.
No.
That's the point.
I think so.
And we're asking the wrong question when we say, are there animals in heaven? Because it's not about heaven. It's about heaven and earth.
Yes.
That's what we're looking forward to, heaven and earth.
The reunification. Great.
Yeah.
Look, that's,
That's it for Revelation 5?
I think that's Revelation 5 done for now.
All right. There's so much more we could do, isn't there?
We are on to, there's enough to unpack in Revelation 6.
All right, let's go there now.
So chapter 6, the imagery gets a little more intense, and again, this probably
could seem scary.
It could seem scary, and I think it does speak to often the picture we have of the apocalypse and what it's going to be like.
Yeah, because there's 4 horsemen and all kinds of stuff. Yeah,
yes.
that's in there. Yep.
So this is where the seals are opened. The Lamb opens the 7 seals, and we're introduced to a white horse, a fiery red horse. I don't know if you want to go through each one, but
well, they each symbolise something.
yeah.
Okay, so
Would you want me to name the
Yeah,
horses?
you
and
name them.
Okay,
Yep.
so we've got, first off, this white horse, and its rider has a bow and is, what I've written down is this conqueror. He's a conqueror bent on conquest.
Yes, that's it. That's exactly what it is. It's a sense of as these seals are going to be unpacked, there's going to be things happening on the earth. So there is one who is bent on conquest.
Mm.
So who is bent on conquest in this environment? Rome. Rome is absolutely bent on conquest.
Yeah.
Empire. So when we say Rome, and I like the word empire because Rome was an empire, but we still have empire today.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to go, oh, that was just ancient times. No, we still have these roots. This is the sinful nature of humanity. So yes, empire
It's
is
probably more
built on
business now.
It's
It's
exactly
probably more
right.
in
I mean,
the
it is. It's
business
totally.
world.
It's
Yeah.
the whole business world thing.
Yeah.
And it was in that time too. It was. We underestimate the importance of economy in the world. And Rome, it was the economy. And we see this later on. Right at the end of Revelation, it talks about, lists all these sins. And it actually says the buying and selling of human slaves. It's all economic language. The list of things is all about using other people and stuff. It was no different back then to what it is now.
Yeah.
It's just the empire is now. It's the media and social media
Influence.
Influence and that's right. And it's just all the same stuff.
Yep.
It's the human nature of empire. So
Hasn't
empire is
changed.
bent on conquest. That's
So
the first thing that
empire.
happens. Yep, that's the
Then we've
the
got
white
the
horse.
second seal, which is the fiery red horse. And he's going to take peace, and I wish I could read my writing.
Its rider was given a mighty sword and authority to take peace from the earth,
And to
there was
kill.
war and slaughter
Yeah.
everywhere.
There you go.
That still happens.
Mm-hmm.
These are things that are the result of human sin.
Gets better. No, I'm joking.
Doesn't get better yet.
The black horse.
Yep.
Comes out with scales.
Yep.
And wages.
Okay, now we're talking economy.
Yeah. Yep.
So this is about famine. I heard the voice from among the four living creatures: a loaf of bread or 3 loaves of barley will cost a day's wages. Don't waste the olive oil and wine. What on earth is that about? That is about famine, hardship, abuse of the poor,
Yep.
Cost of living, all those sorts of things. Yep. So,
It's kind of like plagues, it feels like, doesn't it? Very much
Oh,
the plagues
yes.
of humanity, of what we do to ourselves.
a little later on in the book, probably not in today's chapters, we're going to see a list of plagues poured out. And when you think about them through the end times, you think of the traditional left behind view as, oh, these are all plagues that are going to happen in the future. But I think there's 21 plagues in Revelation, but 10 of those are exactly the 10 plagues of Egypt.
Yeah.
The frogs, the
The blood in
blood,
the water.
all that
and-
sort of stuff. It's all there.
Gnats.
It's supposed to be telling you something. You're supposed to
Yeah.
be reading and going, this is still the
Yeah.
same problem.
Yeah.
Human sin is still the same problem. Empire is still the same problem. And so, yes, in this case, it's this whole idea of mistreating poor. The economy is, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer.
Still happens today.
It still happens.
Fourth horse is the pale horse.
Yep.
Death and Hades.
Yep.
Sword, famine, plague.
Yep. And this is why it seems scary, because this is stuff that you go, oh, I don't want that.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking at future, that's why it's scary. But if you're thinking this is just human history, this is all it's doing is just describing human history.
Yeah. We've just come out of a pandemic.
That's right, exactly. We've come out of, and that has led to, I mean, we talk about this, we've had all 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. We've had floods, we've had fire, we've had famine, we've had plague, really. We've had all of them in the last little while, because it's human history.
Did you say economical?
Economical, well, yes, that's right. That's
Situation?
the whole famine thing. I mean, that's what we're in right
Yeah,
now. So
yeah.
we had, even here in Australia, we had fires, followed by floods, followed by the pandemic, followed by now an economy breakdown. So you could say we've had all 4 of those. Now, the conspiracy theorists will go and link that to the book of Revelation and think about it in the future. That's not, I'm not saying do
human
that.
cycle.
I'm saying
It's
it's the human cycle. It's
Absolutely.
it's the cycle of the life that we live in.
Yep.
Yes.
Then we move on to the altar of souls.
Yes.
White robes, killing. What's going on here?
So these are persecuted people. Many of these people have, in some of these places, have been persecuted to the point of martyrdom. In fact, in Pergamum, in the church in Pergamum, let me just go back there. What does he say to the church in Pergamum? To the church of Laodicea, maybe it's...
I'm glad you're saying all these big words,
Yeah.
Rohan.
Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum. This is what the Lord says, Jesus says to Pergamum. Write this letter to the angel of the church in Pergamum. This is a persecuted church. I know that you live in a city where Satan has his throne, yet you have remained loyal to me. You refused to deny me, even when Antipas, my faithful servant, was martyred among you there in Satan's city. So these guys have experienced martyrdom. Whoever Antipas was, we don't know who he was, but he was martyred for his faith. So they are questioning, is this worth it? They are suffering tremendous persecution. So now, in this unveiling, in this apocalypse, they see that there's a vision of martyrs under the altar. What does that do? It's supposed to, if you read it, it's encouraging to them because the Lord is looking out for them.
Yeah.
So it's supposed to encourage them, not discourage them.
Yes. Good to know. Then we come to the sixth seal. There was an earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair.
Is that what it says?
In my version, it does.
Made of goat hair.
The whole
What verse
moon
are you
turned
in?
blood red. Oh, the NIV.
Yep. What verse?
Oh, what verse?
Oh,
Sorry,
I can
thought
see
what
it.
version.
I watched as the Lamb broke the sixth seal, verse 12.
Yeah.
Sun became as dark as black cloth. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Those figs dropped from the fig tree.
Yep. Yep.
And the heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place.
Sounds pretty apocalyptic.
That to me, I'm like, when does that happen?
So this is language similar to what Joel uses of the day of the Lord. So the prophet Joel talks about the day of the Lord is coming, and Peter quotes Joel, that the sun will be turned, the moon will be turned to blood, and the sun will stop giving its light before the coming of the great day of the Lord. So the day of the Lord is in the Old Testament was a sign of God putting right the things that were wrong, and there was this grand cosmic recreation thing happening. It was like decreation to lead to recreation. Okay, so this is apocalyptic, unveiling, poetic language that when God is getting ready to put everything right, it's going to be decreated because of human sin before it gets recreated. It doesn't need to be taken literally.
Okay.
It's supposed to.
Good.
It's supposed to catch those memories of the past.
Yep.
And say, the day of actually the Bible Project have a really good video on the day of the Lord that explains it, what it means, because they just call it the day sometimes, but in to the Old Testament Jews, it wasn't always it had a hopefulness to it, but it also there was this understanding that God was going to have to allow humanity to expel itself, and things would get worse before they got better.
Yep.
And ultimately, Jesus allowed all of humanity's sin to be expelled on him before to bring about the true day of the Lord. Yep. But that's how you're supposed to be reading this. You're supposed to be reading this with the book of Joel in mind and places like that.
Okay.
Joel
Good.
2,
I won't freak out yet.
No, don't get freaked out yet.
And then we have the wrath of the Lamb in the seventh seal.
Yep.
Says, they call to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it?
That sounds pretty scary, doesn't it?
Yep. But
Now,
you're gonna put us right, aren't you?
I think it's so interesting that my Bible doesn't have a cross reference there. Fall on us and cover us, because there's a picture somewhere in the book of Joshua.
Again, it talks to me. Sorry, just quickly, it reminds me of the shame, the hidden of the garden as well.
Yes, that's right. Get away from this holiness of God, this unwillingness. But I have a feeling that it links back to Joshua.
Okay.
Why am I going to say that? There's a picture in Joshua of God pronouncing judgment and the sun standing still and all that sort of stuff. But I can't remember why. I'd have to Google it. I'm not going to do it now for the sake of time. But yeah, there's still this picture of those who refuse to acknowledge the Lord when confronted by the Lord's power and majesty will shy away from that. Will hide from that because the day of God putting things right. So God's wrath here, and there's a lot of conjecture about is judgment God bringing judgment on the earth? And we're going to be talking about God as judge with Kenny in a couple of weeks' time. I'm going to do judgment and eternal life with Kenny. Is judgment God judging, or is judgment something we do to ourselves? We come under judgment because of our own willfulness, our own desire. And I think it is both. I think to think that sometimes God allows his judgment, hastens judgment, because he knows that it's just going to get worse if he doesn't do something with it. Humanity is just on this downward spiral. And I think that's partly the picture that's supposed to be happening here. The empire is not good for people. Very few people relatively few people are doing well in the natural.
1%.
The 1%ers. Yeah, are doing well. It's probably slightly more than 1, to be fair. It's probably more like 20% have got some level of comfort, the elite. But they're building their empire on the back of the 80% who are treated poorly.
Yep.
And that's just it's not the God of justice. It's not what God's
No.
about. So that's a lot of what this picture's about. God putting right the wrong, the persecution, those that are being treated poorly.
And I think also, even though that idea of judgment can feel confronting and scary and, I'm going to be judged, we also crave, like you say, we crave a just God.
Yes.
Because we are powerless often to do something about those great injustices and the small injustices
and
sometimes.
Totally.
But we crave that, putting that idea of redemption.
It's redemption.
And redeeming certain situations.
I don't believe you can have a loving God who isn't a just God. If God does not right wrongs, he's not truly loving. They're not, we've seen them pinned up as two opposite. It's almost like God's got a dilemma. He's 100% just and he's 100% love, and neither of the two can meet, so he pours out his justice on Jesus. I actually think they're two sides of one coin. A loving God demands that he is a just God, and a just God demands that he's a loving God. It's only in our comfortable Western world where people have never really suffered, If you haven't suffered any form of injustice, you don't understand you want a just God. But those that have been through, in our West, those that have been through trauma or abuse, or those through most people throughout most of history, throughout most of the world, are like these Christians in the book of Revelation here, suffering horrendous injustice. And God's saying, I got you.
Yeah.
I got your back. It'll be okay. I'm working this out.
Yeah.
So it should be encouraging.
It should be reassuring.
It should be reassuring, not scary.
Good to know. Well, look, I think for me, we've unpacked
6.
Revelation 6.
All right. We're doing pretty well, actually. We could have been bogged down. Head on to Revelation 7.
Yes. Okay. Chapter 7.
Yep.
We get to some more numbers.
Yes, there's 144,000. Is this where the 140?
Yeah,
there is.
144,000
Lots of
sealed, lots of
12,000s. Yeah, sure.
12,000s.
Okay.
Look, I think I know probably the answer to my question.
Well,
but
why don't you ask it and answer it?
okay, look, we could take this number literally, and I know there's certain religious groups,
Jehovah's Witnesses
have taken this as to be a literal number of saved souls, or ones who meet I get to be in a certain tier of heaven, from my understanding.
That's something like these are the elites. Yeah.
Yes, but I guess when I look at, obviously the 144,000, but then when it's broken down into these tribes, then I go, well, do they know what tribe they're
exactly.
part
If you're going
of?
to take it literally like a JW would, then they would have to wrestle with, and they may have a solution to this, but they have to wrestle with, seems to be speaking about Jewish tribes, not Gentile tribes.
You'd be on Ancestry.com.
You'd be checking out if you've got any Jewish heritage. Yes, that's right. That's right, exactly. Ancestry.com. Yeah. Totally.
So I'm assuming this is another
I think this is poetic.
Poetic number.
Yeah, the metaphorical, poetic, apocalyptic. Yep.
That talks about every nation, tribe, people, language.
Yep.
So God he's covering all bases of humanity.
Isn't it interesting? He's talking about multi-ethnic family of God here, and yet people want to just focus on this being about Jews. Maybe there's something missing right there already. Yeah,
yes.
Totally. Because he is going to do something for all of humanity.
Yes.
Yep.
So again, the generous nature of God is
it's always been God's plan.
Yes, but often, that human nature to, I don't know if you've read The Prodigal God by Tim Keller.
Tim Keller. I think I have a long time ago.
It's a small book, but it's a great.
But I feel like I know it because I've listened to so many Tim Keller podcasts since he passed away. Yeah, so just listened to so many people commenting on.
Yeah,
him. Yeah. So
well, it's a great picture of that, that idea that we can often relate more to the prodigal son or the son that stayed. And I think that son who stayed mentality is often trying to reduce God's goodness to either us who've got our act together sometimes or who look a certain way or be a certain way or certain flavour of church.
The elitist tendency that we all have.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's a nice way of
that
putting
we
it.
all want to become the elite.
Yes.
Israel wanted to become the elite. God's intention was that they would be a kingdom of priests. We talked about this in an earlier podcast. That is supposed to be God's kingdom is for you so that you can go out to the world. I'm going to bless you, Abraham, so you can be a blessing. Through you, all the nations will be blessed. That's always been God's plan. Human nature says, oh, no, now I've got it. I'll keep it for myself.
It's the us and them.
Yeah,
we
totally.
love that us and them.
Yep. And we don't even realise we do it too.
No.
And God's constantly counteracting that, saying it's not about just you. And evangelicals do it. Catholics do it. It's the same. It doesn't matter. It's human nature. It's not a Christian problem. It's a human problem.
Yes.
And God's through all that he's trying to get our attention. It's not about you. It's about all of you together.
Yes. When will we get there?
Yeah, that's right.
Point?
Well, this is what the reminder of this story is all about. Yeah.
So it talks, about the 144,000 and
all sealed and so on.
all sealed and then it starts talking about the great multitude in white robes. Again, like we say, from every nation and tribe and people and language. The angels are standing around. So there's this picture of, angelic creatures as well as all people.
Yes, yeah. There's a unification here.
So this is this unification of heaven and earth.
Yep.
So is this future pointing, or is this
or is this current?
Is
this
current?
now?
Is this?
If it's apocalyptic? I think we shouldn't be thinking future. I think we should be thinking. Well, we shouldn't be thinking. It's not that we shouldn't be thinking future. We just shouldn't be thinking exclusively future. So there is what they call a preterist view, which basically says all of this was fulfilled at the time it was written. So basically between then and the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, that was what this was all about. So that's a preterist view. There's a futurist view which says it's all in the future. And in between that, there is like views of this cyclic view you're talking about, which is this is just human nature. This is human patterns. And yes, it has been fulfilled, but what was will happen again and so on. So I think I'm probably lean more to that.
Okay. So almost that cycle, but then this bigger
a bigger fulfillment in the future, yes.
Yeah.
If you take purely the preterist view, you have to wash down the mentality that there's going to be ever a future reckoning, and so this is going to be the way it is forever and ever and ever. I think that you need to see, I need to see that Jesus is eventually coming to put right, that we are the foretaste, we are the first fruits of that. And well, he's the first fruit, and now we are the first fruits under him of bringing that to the earth. But there is a day coming in the future at some point where Jesus will right every wrong, wipe away every tear, it says in Revelation.
You were just stealing my thunder there.
Was I? Okay, so that's future stuff. But I think we shouldn't dismiss that this is an unveiling, that there is more going on here. I think what I would say on the 144,000 and the 12,000, and I remember talking about this early on with Jeannie, number 12 has significance in the Bible, just like 7 has significance. You know what number 12 means?
To me, it's representing God's people.
Yep, okay. So where does the number 12 appear?
It's the 12 tribes.
12 tribes, which we see listed here. 12 disciples, yep. So 12 actually symbolises God's authority or governance. So it's a governmental term. Okay. It's an authority term. So if you recognise it in that way, that God governs through his 12 tribes, or Jesus deliberately picked 12 disciples for that same sense of governance.
And governance through the Old Covenant and the New Covenant.
Yep, exactly. And so here you have a blending of the Old Covenant, the 12 tribes, and it goes on and talks about all people.
Yeah.
So this is a blending of old and new. Jesus says to the disciples, you will sit on 12 thrones and judge the tribes of Israel. What's he talking about? Is he talking about literal 12 thrones, or is he just using a metaphorical language? I tend to think he's using metaphorical language of this governance, this judgment, this authority bearing. And so this picture is a metaphorical statement that says God is still judging and using his people. God still is going to select people from all nations and tribes to be part of his governance, and that he, even though it might look like Caesar is governing and judging, ultimately God will still bring judgment and authority through his elect, through his people. So I think, once again, that's how I would read this. I mean, I'm sure you could dig into it and get a lot more nuance out of it than that, but I think at first glance, that's what I see in it now these days.
No, that makes, I mean, I like that idea of what that number represents.
Yeah.
So governance.
Yes, governance.
Okay. Usually a boring subject, governance.
Yeah, it is. It is when you're on a board, believe me.
That's
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
But you did allude to, are you happy for me to
Yeah,
jump
go
ahead?
ahead.
But just that picture, again, of that, I mean, it's a beautiful, reassuring picture, and it's down in verses 15 to 17. I was going to read it out because
Go for it.
I can't do justice to it any other way. It says, therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. Never again will they hunger, never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat down on them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the centre of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And this, just to me, I think it did kind of almost link back to that Psalm 126.
Yes,
that
yes.
picture
He will
again.
bring redemption and streams of living water, it said in Psalm 126. Yes. Yes,
So-
it does. Very good. I
There
like
you
it.
go.
Oh, that wasn't intended. That was a Holy Spirit link up when I
Yeah.
put that in there. But that's really good. Yeah, I love that. That's a great thought. Well, who are these people he's talking to? In fact, John's asking that just right before you read it. In verse 13, one of the 24 elders asked me, who are these who are clothed in white? Where did they come from? And he says, I don't know. You know, Lord. He's saying to this elder, and he says, these are the ones who died in the Great Tribulation. Now, what is the Great Tribulation? Don't think future again. Think these
That was one
people
of my
are in
questions, so
tribulation.
good. Yeah.
So these are the martyrs, like the ones in Pergamum. These are the martyrs who are suffering through tribulation. And God is saying they have had their robes washed in the blood of Christ, and that he is going to, they're standing before God's throne. It's supposed to be
They're going to have
encouraging
harvest
picture.
feasting.
They're going to have their harvest time. Yes, they have endured, and they love Revelation, not going to do it today, 10 verse 11. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death.
So I guess for those churches that were reading this at the time, this would have been hugely encouraging.
It was intended to be.
To feel seen. They would have felt seen.
Seen, yes, that's right. Yeah. So when you read it through the lens of chapters 1, 2, and 3, rather than separating it out from 1, 2, and 3, just like we do that with every other part of Scripture. I'm always, as a Bible teacher, always trying to anchor people back, like we did in the book of
So
Ruth.
hint, read 1 to 3
Read
before you...
1 to 3 and think about and study what were these people in 1 to 3 going through? What was life like for them? What was life like in these different cities? And you'll find these two things. One, they were being persecuted and martyred. Two, they had this constant temptation to be complicit with the empire. If you know those two things, you can read the rest of it. So we just extract out Revelation normally and put it in the future, but we just did Ruth, and I just showed you how it was helpful to understand some of what was going on. It's exactly the same with the book of Revelation. God is working out his redemptive plan with these people, even though they're going through a hard time. Yep, that's right.
Great.
It's good. All right.
Well, that's for me, chapter 7.
We're nearly there. 2 to
Yeah.
go. Revelation chapter 8 coming up.
We're going to look at chapter 8 and 9 together.
Sure.
And I need to firstly say that I mentioned that the seventh seal, which I was incorrect about.
Yeah, the
because
first 6 seals
It's the
were-
first 6.
Yes,
The seventh seal is opened in chapter 8.
that's correct. The first 6 happened earlier on.
Yes.
Yep.
And we're treated to a little bit of silence in heaven
Mm,
for just half an hour.
half an hour.
I love that detail. It's
I know.
like,
Sure, there's some meaning in that, but I don't know what it is.
oh, I underlined. I was hoping you're going to.
I can.
No.
There is some sense of, I think, overwhelm. I
Yeah.
think it's supposed to be a picture of overwhelm.
Okay.
This hushed silence about
Yeah.
what on earth is happening.
I just like that. It's sort of a little bit earthy there in amongst
Yes.
the kind of celestial
Yep.
picture.
Yep.
But we have, angels, 7 angels, trumpets, an angel with a golden
bowls and yeah.
and
We've got seals, trumpets, and bowls here.
yeah. Kind of reminds me of my Catholic roots.
Right, yeah.
No, just
Yeah.
some of the
imagery.
Yeah, imagery.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, it's rich in imagery.
It's rich in imagery, but there, again, we're coming to some imagery that is hard to.
Well, here's
swallow.
another reason why we shouldn't read it linearly. It's not written linearly.
Yeah, okay.
It's written cyclically. There's 7 seals, and then inside the 7 seals is at 1.7 trumpets, and then inside 7 trumpets is 7 bowls. So it's actually it's not written like seals 1 to 7.
Yeah.
Then trumpets 1 to 7, then bowls 1 to 7. It's not written that way. It's written
packing.
It's written cyclically, and so we should hint at we shouldn't try to actually interpret it linearly. It's not.
Okay.
It's written metaphorically
Yes.
and cyclically, and yet we try to interpret it
And then
literally
this happened, and then this happened,
and chronologically.
Okay.
Yes, and we shouldn't do that.
Okay.
That's right.
But
It's
we
not
should look at it at the pictures that it's trying
the
to
pictures that represents.
and the cyclic nature.
Yes, that's right.
So we are the trumpets. To me, that signifies victory normally, or warning, I guess.
All of them, yes.
All of
so
the
the
above.
trumpets. So to a Jew, they knew their trumpets. The priests had 2 trumpets in the Old Testament, and they were to make that. Moses said, "Fashion out 2 trumpets," and he says, "Blow these at times of harvest, blow them at time of celebration, blow them when the call to war." So there were all these presumably different trumpet calls
Wow, so
represented
there's
different things.
The trumpets have been around a while.
Trumpets have been
not
around
just-
a long, long time. Yeah. So and at this time, they would blow the trumpets on the temple at the end of the Sabbath day to call them to rest. So trumpets were well known as a
communication
communication
tool as well.
device. Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yep.
So they would again. This is symbolic language that the readers would really
They would resonate with this.
with.
Yep.
Yep. So I don't know if you want to unpack all the different trumpets. I've just picked up on some of the other
Well, ask me.
pictures,
we
like
won't
the
try to-
third of earth burned up.
The third thing. Okay, so the
Yes.
third of the earth burned up. There was a third of the waters burned up, and all that
Third
sort
of
of stuff.
mankind killed.
Third of
you know.
mankind. Yeah, just
Just a
small
few.
thing. Yeah, 30%. I think the third tells me. I think the third probably tells me it's significant but not complete. So as bad as things get on the earth, as bad as human sin gets and messes things up, I think I would read that without doing much research into it. And I'm sure you could get more out of it if we think. I'm trying to think of any Old Testament scriptures that talk about the third of God's judgment being referred to in thirds. I can't think of anything. So I'm thinking it's significant enough that it's difficult, but it's trying to show that God's still working. He's not written off all of creation. I think
And
that's
thankfully, it's not 2/3.
and thankfully it's not 2/3. Yes, I think that's right. I think it's almost like God saying, even though things look really, really bad, I've still got. It might look like 1/3 of the world's going to hell. Basically, he's saying I've still
Take
got this in
heart.
control. Take heart.
I've
I
overcome the
think
world.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
We could look at that. Let me just look. Let's just do.
I'm
a
happy
little,
to take that one.
Well, let's just do a little,
Let's
just
do
for
a
our
little
listeners.
Google.
Just take a little. Let's just see what ChatGPT has to say about it. So let's just see. This is just give us some ideas. This is how you can use ChatGPT. What is the significance? What is the significance of the reference to thirds in Revelation? What is it? What are we in? 8?
8. Yeah.
Let's just see what it has to say. Now, don't take everything ChatGPT says literally, but it's a tool that can just give you some idea of, because it's collated up everything that the Bible said. It gives it thoughts. So let's see what it says. It says, I won't read the whole thing because it delights in giving you an explanation. In these verses, 7 angels are given 7 trumpets, and each trumpet blast heralds a specific judgment. The judgments involve various natural disasters and afflictions causing destruction and upheaval. The mention of thirds in this context indicates that these judgments are not total or complete. There you go. But maybe it was just listening to me and it's giving me what I want to say. But they affect 1/3 of the affected area or object. For example, the first angel sounds his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and 1/3 of the earth was burned up, etc., etc. Similarly, the subsequent trumpet judgments involve a third of the sea,
third of the
and a
day,
third of
the
the
light,
land, etc.
night. Yep.
The repeated use of thirds emphasizes the partial nature of these judgments, indicating they're severe but not all-encompassing.
There's still hope.
There's still hope. I think that's what it's saying. The significance of this reference to thirds is open to interpretation. Yep, makes sense. Some see it as a demonstration of God's mercy and restraint in the midst of judgment. So this is almost like Noah being rescued through through the judgment. It's not complete in that sense. It suggests that even in the face of such catastrophic events, God is not unleashing his full wrath, but is providing a warning and an opportunity for repentance. Now that fits. It's like, I'm going to allow a certain amount of humanity's sin to run its course, but the purpose is that I would call you back to myself, that there is always an opportunity for repentance. So if he's writing to a people who are
11th
suffering...
hour.
Exactly. These people are suffering persecution and hardship, and it seems like all hell is breaking loose. And this picture is, there's an open invitation. It's not too late for you to turn back. Are you living for empire? Stop living for empire.
I was just going to say, it's almost that thing of, I think we can all be a little bit like, oh, you can't beat them, join them. You know, when life gets you down, or I'm just going to cut this corner, or I'm going to do, you know. But God's saying, no, there's...
Stick with it. There's reason to stick with it. I reckon that's makes sense there. Thank you, GPT.
Thank you.
That makes sense to me.
I like that.
Yeah, it elaborates on what I was thinking. But that's how it's new ways. I would never have read that way in the past. I mean, I was raised thinking, I remember thinking in the early days of my Christianity that says this, you know, this thing falls to ground and its name is wormwood and it dries up.
Oh, yes, I saw wormwood.
Wormwood. Well, I was taught that was the Chernobyl disaster.
Right.
So they were linking it to a specific event in the 1980s. The Chernobyl disaster, it was going to poison a third of the world's water and all that sort of stuff. And it nearly did. But this is that kind of, my Bible college lecturer used to say, the problem back in those days is we hold the Bible up in one hand and the newspaper in the other.
Oh, yeah.
He says it's not helpful to do that.
And I think also that breeds fear, doesn't it?
That's what breeds fear.
And paranoia, because, and we've seen that in recent years with lots
the
of things
pandemic and everything
else. The pandemic
else.
is, you know, it has bred fear and division, and that's not what Jesus. That was not what he was bringing.
No, that's not what he was bringing. And I think for me over the last few years, having some different teaching and starting to go, you know, I've been listening to end times predictions, prophecies for 30 years of my Christian life now. And so many have come and gone. Maybe I should start to think, maybe I'm not reading this right. Maybe there's more going on here than meets the eye. Yeah. So that's kind of, and then it distracts
us from also what God's wanting to do right here.
I reckon right here and now, which is what you're talking about. How are we living in this world? How are we complicit with empire? Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about Abyss, but I think if you want to. But one, you know, just an interesting little thing was they were not allowed to kill them. It's just to do with the grass. Oh, no, the people who did not have the seal on them. But they were allowed to be tortured for 5 months. I mean, I'm assuming, again, that's that picture of, you know, they're still open to choice.
Yeah.
And to
but you can see
redemption.
why if you're going to read it futuristically.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what LaHaye and Jenkins did. I remember reading through the Left Behind books, and it's exactly 5 months that they're being tortured, and they're purely taking it literally. And
gosh.
And you know, they're being attacked by bugs, like by killer locusts for 5 months or something. You can take it purely literally, and that's how they read it. That's how they absorbed it. But I have to think that maybe there are other ways to read this. But look, I don't.
And justice is in God's hands, I guess. God is.
Look, I'd go further. I reckon if you dig into it, all of these metaphors have meaning. So I think there's benefit with extended study of researching and studying it. There might be significance in the 5 months and the half an hour in heaven and all that. We haven't got time to go into it, but put tools in your hands so that you can actually do that and realise that it's worth studying this. It means something to them.
And I think the way you framed Revelation and these chapters, I think is very helpful in terms of like wanting to go into further study. Yeah. Going with that more of that hopeful, encouraging mindset.
Yes, that's
one of my questions was, you know, is it a warning? Is Revelation a big? I mean, there would be warning in there, but it is, like you say, it's supposed to be an encouragement of God is working behind the scenes, and He is, you know, never going to desert His people.
That's the point. Yep. The warning is in challenge to stay true and stay loyal to His redemptive plan rather than to go our way and become complicit. That's the warning and the challenge. It's there, but it's also coupled with this encouragement. Yeah.
Look, we could go into more, but I feel like, is there anything that you wanted to?
No. I think we've done 8 and 9 there. We will come back, I'm sure, to other parts of Revelation in the rest of the series. But thank you for being willing to take on these, even if you did it without even realizing, taking on these passages. But I think let's sum it up then redemptively. The book of Revelation is supposed to be redemptive, but in the end, God is reconciling the world to himself through Jesus. And so no matter how dark and desperate things seem in our own lives or in the world around us, God's redemptive plan is still at work. And so this should encourage us.
Definitely. Yeah. I guess my final question is, how do we partner with God to be part of his redemptive work?
Great question. I think it's a day-by-day decision. I think it's like living the Lord's Prayer. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation. I think it's a day-by-day, Lord, let me live the upside-down kingdom today. Let me live Matthew 5, 6, and 7, a Sermon on the Mount life. That is actually how we do God's redemptive plan. If in all our encounters we would be focused on living the upside-down way, loving our neighbour as ourself, doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. Your kids are just running around at the back. They're starting to get restless.
Hearing
it's all
footsteps.
good. Yeah, there's footsteps up the back. But if we would think of it that way, then that is living redemptively. That is living new creation life. It doesn't have to be some grand thing. The little choices that we make, the way we parent our kids, the way we do those things, every time we do that, we bring a little bit of heaven to earth, or we fail to bring heaven to earth. And that is
intentional living.
That's intentional and Christian living.
Yeah.
And I think that is what we are called to do. And sometimes that will meet us with blessing in this life, and sometimes it will making those choices will lead to hardship. It will lead to persecution like it did for these people. But then it's, how do we stand up under persecution? Do we resort to empire when we're persecuted and fight back, or do we do what we're encouraged to do, which is stay faithful, keep serving, keep
Ruth.
loving? Sorry?
Be Ruth.
Be Ruth, yes. Put yourself out for other people. Continue to think redemptively, even about those that persecute us. Jesus says, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. That's redemptive living. When empire says, no, curse them back, Jesus says, no, bless them back. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I think that's redemptive. Hey, thanks, Becky.
Thank you.
Oh, a lot of fun.
That was,
you're a great thinker. I enjoy it.
Oh,
yeah, there's some great stuff in there. I really enjoyed that. Thanks for.
I did too. Thank you.
Might get you back again at some point in the future as well.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Have a great week, everyone.
You too.